Chapter 2762. The court lord held the hilt of the sword and slowly raised the tip. His remaining pupils reflected the five-colored light, and his voice was hoarse. "Do you know what kind of sword this is?" Suyu stared at the five-colored sword. That aura was very familiar. It seemed like they had come into contact with each other in the distant past. "It's a sword refined from the blood of ancient god Nine Dragon," the court lord indifferently said. Suyu's heart trembled. No wonder it felt familiar. Back then, ancient god Nine Dragon requested the human ancestor to leave a letter written in blood for his successor. The divine blood had even helped Suyu improve his cultivation. This sword was left behind by ancient god Nine Dragon before he left the heavenly court, the court lord said slowly. Its purpose was to guard against the hegemon and his descendants. He slowly raised his sword and pointed it at Suyu. All of a sudden, Suyu felt the bloodline of the ruler in his body churn unceasingly, and he felt a sharp pain from it. Many domains were released uncontrollably, becoming scattered and formless. Ancient god Nine Dragons has always been the bane of hegemons. His blood can suppress all hegemons, the court lord said. But you, thinking yourself clever, took the blood of a hegemon. In other words, the ancient god's blood sword could also suppress Suyu. As a result, he was unable to unleash his elemental realm. Suyu, who had lost his domain, could only rely on the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations in his hands and the secret technique of the heavenly book characters. "Now answer me. How do you want to die?" the court master asked calmly. He didn't give Suyu any choice. Suyu's face was calm, and he did not panic at all. He had never intended to use his ruler's bloodline to suppress the heavenly court. "Old man, I advise you to restrain yourself," Suyu said calmly. "Otherwise, you will be the one crying." The court master shook his head slowly. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then, go to hell." What he regretted the most was listening to Gongzijua. It had allowed Suyu to live for a few more days and caused irreparable damage to him. Qi, the ancient god's blood sword in his hand, slashed towards Suyu. A five-colored trail pierced through the void. Under the suppression of the colorful light, Suyu couldn't use his time, space, soul, and life domains. He couldn't dodge. He could only face it head-on. Outside the world of Wushu, Suyu weaved his hands together and uttered mysterious words from the heavenly book. 100 heavenly book characters wrapped around Suyu's body and rotated continuously, bursting out golden beams of light that sheltered Suyu within. Bang! The five-colored trajectory slashed at the pillar of light, causing it to creak as if it couldn't bear the heavy burden. It looked like it was going to break in the next moment. However, this was ultimately just sword qi, and the rate at which it was being worn down was extremely fast. It didn't take long for the sword qi to dissipate. Suyu stopped making signs with his hands and flicked his 5 fingers forward. The golden light pillar that was protecting his body swiftly swept over. The court master was surprised. Where did Suyu get his heavenly book secret technique? Even the ancient god blood sword couldn't easily kill it? Seeing the light pillar coming at him, he held the ancient god blood sword in front of his chest. The five-colored ancient god blood on the surface continued to boil and let out dragon roars. The beam of light that swept over was immediately dispersed by the dragon's roar. The two of them exchanged 1 round each, and neither of them could do anything to the other. Many descendants of the ancient gods retreated, shocked by Suyu's terrifying strength. From the looks of it, he wasn't using his full strength. What he revealed just now was just the tip of the iceberg. The court lord couldn't let go of his pride. Even the master of the heavenly court couldn't do anything to a puny Suyu. Heavenly Luo / The court lord held the ancient god blood sword in his hand and imbued it with the strength of the heaven law master. Bang! With a loud noise, a cloud of blood mist erupted from the ancient god blood sword. The blood mist turned into a 5-colored dragon, roaring as it approached. It opened its bloody mouth and bit at Suyu fiercely. Su Yu remained calm and stepped on the ground with the tip of his foot. Immediately, an enormous azure dragon appeared under his foot. All of them were condensed from the heavenly book characters. With a roar, he tore at the blood dragon. One of them was the ancient god's blood, while the other was the heavenly book character's secret technique. Both of them were equally powerful. Su Yu looked at the court lord calmly and said, "You can't do anything to me. If you don't want to cause serious damage, stop." He looked at the ground and saw many areas that had been affected by the battle and said calmly. Hearing this, the court lord was shocked and angry. If he let Su Yu go today, how could he, the court lord, convince the people in the future? Su Yu, you are too arrogant. How could the ancient god blood sword left by the ancient god Jilong only have this little power? The court lord suddenly bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood mist. The blood mist fell on the ancient god blood sword. The sword immediately burst into dazzling five-colored light. From afar it looked like a five-colored sun. Glory of the ancient god! The ancient god blood sword seemed to have been reborn. Under the illumination of the light, the azure dragon of the heavenly book characters that Su Yu had condensed immediately fell apart. Su Yu's face became slightly more serious. The ancient god blood sword was indeed worthy of its name. Just now, it could only be considered as a sheathed sword. Now that it had fully displayed its power, it felt completely different. Be buried by the ancient god blood sword. The court lord's eyes were majestic as he raised the ancient god blood sword high. A five-colored light shot up into the sky, broke through the void, and reached the depths of the world. Under the five-colored light, all the weak creatures in the heaven court crawled on the ground, not daring to move. It was as if they were facing a supreme being. Even Su Yu felt a rare shiver run down his spine. It was as if he was facing the ancient god Jilong himself. Destroy! The court lord used a secret technique and slashed down with a loud bang. The pillar of light that shot up into the sky came crashing down with the power of the heavens. All of a sudden, the entire heaven court's giant ship trembled. Su Yu faced the pillar of light head-on. One could imagine the pressure he was under. His blood was boiling, and his body was trembling. Even his soul, which had the soul emperor robe, felt weak like a candle in the wind. It was as if it would be blown out the next moment. Su Yu naturally did not dare to be careless. His fingers turned like wheels, and he performed seals at an extremely fast speed. He consecutively set up 3 defensive secret techniques of the heavenly book characters in front of him. These were all the defensive secret techniques he had learned so far. Each one was stronger than the one before. Crack! However, the first secret technique could not withstand the pressure before the pillar of light reached it, and it shattered with a loud bang. The heavenly book characters completely collapsed. Su Yu was slightly shocked. Without even putting up a resistance, it shattered. The power of the pillar of light was far beyond his expectations. Boom! When the pillar of light fell, the second defense around Su Yu shattered with a loud sound. There was not even a moment of defense. Su Yu's heart trembled slightly. Creak, creak. The pillar of light came crashing down, pressing down on the last line of defense. The defense was immediately overwhelmed by the pressure, and it was twisting rapidly, as if it was about to explode. Not good. Crack. In the end, the defense still shattered. All the heavenly book characters were destroyed by the pressure. The huge pillar of light swallowed Su Yu in an instant. Su Yu was not allowed to struggle. In the distance, Yu Xiangwan and Hong Yao's eyes were filled with sorrow. The court lord had gone too far. He had tricked Su Yu into coming here and killed him. How could a dignified court lord be so despicable? The court lord heaved a sigh of relief, looking at the gradually dissipating pillar of light. He was a little worried. It won't hurt the divine nine-dragon cauldron, will it? However, a cold reply came from within the pillar of light. Chapter 2763. What? He's not dead yet? The court master's old body trembled violently. That was the strongest attack of the ancient god blood sword that he could unleash. The ancient god Jilong had once said, "The power of this attack was unpredictable. It was difficult to survive the early stage of the Heaven Law Master, so it had to be used with caution." However, he had just used it on Suyu. Suyu was not dead. Everyone held their breath as they stared at the gradually dissipating light beam without blinking. In the core area of the light beam, a blood-red ball wrapped around Suyu. The ball was liquid. However, it was not water. Instead, it was a liquid-like substance formed by millions of heavenly book characters. A hint of evil and bloodthirsty aura assaulted his senses. Suyu took a gentle step forward, and the blood ball automatically made way for him, revealing Suyu's figure. He looked at the court master, the descendants of the ancient gods behind him, and the huge heaven court indifferently. He said coldly, "I have given you enough chances and advised you to stop. Why do you have to force me to the end?" Crash! The blood ball behind him suddenly began to gush out a large amount of blood. There was no end to it, and it kept flowing out. It was as if there was an endless flow of blood in it. The blood fell to the ground, and as soon as it touched anything, it would immediately corrode and become a part of the blood. When the first drop of blood landed on the palace, it immediately corroded the entire palace. However, the corrosion did not stop. The earth was corroded, revealing the heaven court's defensive formation. The great sickle of 10,000 tribulations could not shake the defensive formation, but the drop of blood melted a huge hole. Yes, it was directly corroded and shattered. Seeing this, the court master and the ancient god descendants sucked in a breath of cold air. What kind of secret technique is this? It's too terrifying. However, it was only a drop of blood. The blood in the blood ball was flowing out endlessly. "Stop them!" Deputy Court Master Jean Fian's scalp went numb. Once the blood fell to the ground, it would definitely corrode the entire heaven court. However, it was easy to say, but how could they stop them? Did they not see such a powerful defensive formation being completely corroded? Walala! Finally, the blood fell to the ground, melting a small part of the heaven court into blood. The scene was like Avicii hell, and it was extremely ghastly. At the same time, the 8 peaks were drowned in the sea of blood one after another. Only ancient god Nine Dragons Mountain was untouched. "Stop!" the court master shouted. Seeing the heavenly court being destroyed bit by bit, the court lord's heart burned with anxiety. He regretted it. He regretted bringing Suyu to the heaven court. "It's already too late," Suyu said calmly. "I can't control it either." This was the most forbidden secret skill he had mastered, Boundless Blood Sea. Unless everything was melted into a pool of blood, it would not stop. What? Can't stop? Seeing that the heavenly court was about to be completely destroyed, the court lord's internal organs were on fire. At this moment, a light shout pierced through heaven and earth. What followed was the will of a king that suppressed all living beings. 9 dragons suppressing the mountains and rivers. A giant cauldron that looked very similar to the divine 9-dragon cauldron descended from the sky. The 9 giant dragons above let out roars and roars as they opened their mouths and inhaled. It actually sucked away all the blood on the ground. The giant ship of the heavenly court, which was about to be corroded, escaped the calamity. The court master and the descendants of the ancient gods heaved a sigh of relief. They were all surprised. Who was it? How could it suppress the blood? Moreover, why was the cauldron he controlled so similar to the divine 9-dragon cauldron? The method of control was particularly orthodox. Swish, the space cracked. A man wearing a black cloak, a dragon robe, and a crown on his head. The majestic king stood on the divine cauldron with his hands behind his back. Seeing him, many people expressed confusion. They had never seen him before. But the court master was excited. "Zhan Wushuang? Weren't you sent to the Tao Abyss?" On that day, the Martial Path Temple brought Zhan Wushuang back and immediately reported to the court master. When the court master found out that he was a natural king, he immediately ordered people to send him to the Tao abyss. Unexpectedly, in just 1 or 2 years, he was reborn and returned. Furthermore, his first move was an astonishing one. Zhan Wushuang looked down from above, his eyes cold and ruthless. He looked at Su Yu. Su Yu, why don't you kneel when you see me? His voice was full of supreme majesty. It was as if he was the king of heaven and earth, dominating everything and suppressing everything. Su Yu's eyes turned cold. Wherever his eyes passed, everything turned into ice. The Martial Path Temple was Han Xuan's direct murderer. But Zhan Wushuang betrayed him, and was the culprit behind Han Xuan's death. How can a defeated opponent be qualified to call himself a king? Su Yu slowly rose up and looked at him at the same level. Zhan Wushuang's eyes were full of disdain, full of majesty. Lowly creature, get lost. You don't deserve to look at me at the same level. He waved his hand. The giant cauldron under his feet swept over with astonishing momentum. That was the method of activating the divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron, but Zhan Wushuang used it skillfully. Su Yu snorted coldly. 4 yuan-level domains condensed into a staff. From top to bottom, it lashed out fiercely. Bang! The cauldron was sent flying and rolled back. Su Yu was unstoppable. He flew up into the sky and looked at him at the same level. In front of me, you don't deserve to be called a king. Zhan Wushuang's eyes were cold and full of pity. Pathetic thing, you don't know who you are facing. Su Yu waved his hand and his divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron slowly appeared. I am facing a person who has been defeated time and time again. I have let him off and saved him countless times, and I have given him an emperor's armament. But he still repaid my kindness with ingratitude and reported me. In the end, he caused the death of a woman who loved him. He had never called others trash. Never. Only Zhan Wushuang. It didn't matter if his abilities were crippled. It didn't matter if his body was crippled. But if his heart was crippled, then he was truly trash. Zhan Wushuang's heart ached. The only thing he didn't want to admit was that he was trash. Su Yu. Zhan Wushuang's eyes were filled with killing intent. You caused Han Xuan's death. Do you know your crime? Su Yu's aura was majestic. The divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron in his palm rotated rapidly, emitting an ear-piercing sound. He looked at Zhan Wushuang from afar. Trash who deceives himself. You don't even have the courage to look yourself in the eye. Han Xian was really blind to marry you. Why did Han Xian die? Did Zhan Wushuang not know? He was only deceiving himself, not daring to admit that he had caused Han Xuan's death. Hence, he vented his anger on Su Yu. You are the sinner. Zhan Wushuang's body emitted waves of dragon roars. 9 dragon soul virtual shadows surrounded his body. I want your head. I will use your blood and your eternal soul as a sacrifice to Han Xuan's soul in heaven. Zhan Wushuang roared angrily. Wrapped in the 9 dragon soul virtual shadows, he stepped on the wind and clouds as he charged over. Wherever his footsteps passed, all living things prostrated themselves. Imperceptibly, he had the aura of a king that could suppress all living things in the world. Chapter 2764. You are the one who should die. Su Yu bellowed. The rapidly spinning divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron in front of his chest turned into a shadow as it shot forward. Zhan Wushuang stretched out a hand and said in a dignified tone, You know nothing. He formed a mysterious seal with his palm. The rapidly spinning divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron began to stop on its own. Moreover, it kept struggling on the spot. It flew towards Su Yu, then towards Zhan Wushuang. Su Yu had only seen this scene with the descendant of the ancient god Jilong. Could Zhan Wushuang be the descendant of the ancient god Jilong? Come back! Su Yu bellowed. The ancient god Jilong had been refined by him for a long time. It immediately returned to his palm. Zhan Wushuang failed and said coldly, Do you see? I am the king of everything. Su Yu looked at the divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron and put it away silently. A king who needs my charity even for the emperor's 4-piece set? Su Yu sneered. At the same time, he waved his hand and the great scythe of 10,000 calamities appeared in his palm. Activating the bloodline of the ruler, he immediately revealed his true form and slashed with the scythe. Instantly, 9 beams of destructive black light swept forward. Zhan Wushuang said disdainfully, "Child's play." He pointed his finger and said, "Break!" Roar. Among the 9 dragons surrounding Zhan Wushuang, a dragon's soul roared. It swung its giant tail fiercely and destroyed the destructive black light. The dragon's soul did not slow down and went straight for Su Yu. Su Yu had to use 3 secret defensive techniques of the Heavenly Book. The dragon's soul was extremely ferocious and immediately smashed the first layer of defense, then crashed into the second layer of defense. After a moment of stalemate, the 2 layers of defense broke at the same time. Zhan Wushuang was like the king of heaven as he said lightly, "Again?" Another dragon's soul descended, roaring and crashing into the 3rd layer of defense. Crack! Crack! The strongest layer of defense stubbornly resisted the attack from the dragon's soul. After 10 breaths, the defense finally broke. The dragon's soul came roaring. Su Yu blocked with the great scythe of 10,000 calamities in front of his chest and was pushed back by the dragon's soul. Seeing this, Zhan Wushuang stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said indifferently, "You can't even withstand a single blow." He said with self-mockery, "I used to think that you were an invincible person, but it turns out that you are so weak. In the past, I was truly as inferior as a pitiful worm." As he looked at Su Yu, his eyes were filled with hatred and disdain. "Han Xian actually died for a piece of trash like you. It's really not worth it." He raised his finger again. Another dragon's soul roared and charged over. Without a defensive secret technique, how could Su Yu survive? He would definitely die. Even if he were to display his strongest boundless blood sea, he would still be buried in the dragon's soul. "Disappear from this world, Su Yu." Zhan Wushuang closed his eyes indifferently and turned around slowly. He disdained to witness the scene of Su Yu's death. Facing the 7 dragon souls, Su Yu's expression was extremely calm. He took out Jade Pearl, as well as the bloodlines of the Chief Sovereign of Fate, the Chief Sovereign of Samsara, and the Chief Sovereign of Creation. With the help of the exquisite Jade Pearl, the 3 great rulers' bloodlines were easily refined and quickly absorbed by Su Yu. Boom, 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 thunder rumbled from the depths of the void. Suspended in the depths of heaven and earth, the sacred mountain, which was about to descend, flashed with golden light. It was as if something that should not have been born had been born between heaven and earth. A halo appeared between Su Yu's brows. The halo had 7 colors. Each color represented a supreme domain between heaven and earth. There were a total of 7, encompassing almost everything in the world. The halo between Su Yu's brows flickered slowly. It maintained a high degree of consistency with the gaze of his eyes. "Destroy," Su Yu said calmly. A thin line shot out from within the halo. With a muffled rumble, the 5-colored thin line shot out and instantly destroyed the dragon's soul into ashes. The dragon's soul did not even have the slightest chance to resist. Zhan Wushuang suddenly groaned and turned around abruptly. Staring at the halo between Su Yu's brows, his pupils shrank fiercely. 7 yuan domains? Apart from the death domain, he had mastered all the other domains. Su Yu looked at Zhan Wushuang calmly. "Continue." Zhan Wushuang gritted his teeth and immediately mobilized the remaining 6 dragon souls to charge at Su Yu. Su Yu stood where he was, motionless. With just a gentle blink of an eye, a destructive ray of light shot out from the halo. The 6 ferocious dragon souls that could crush heaven and earth were all easily destroyed by the ray of light. Not a single one was left. "Is this what you are so proud of? A born emperor?" Su Yu said coldly. "Your previous thinking was not wrong. You will never defeat me in this lifetime." Zhan Wushuang clenched his fists and shouted, "Su Yu! I am the king that you must kneel before. It was in the past, today, and in the future. He grabbed the air and shouted, "Sword, come!" Swoosh! The ancient god-blood sword in the court master's hand flew out and fell into Zhan Wushuang's hand. I will let you understand what the real ancient god-blood sword is. Zhan Wushuang held the hilt of the sword. The ancient god-blood sword was overflowing with a layer of moisture. It was the fresh ancient god blood hidden in the ancient god blood sword. It was also the most dangerous part of the ancient god blood sword. The court master was shocked. He had controlled the ancient god blood sword for many years, but he had never known that there was ancient god blood in the ancient god blood sword. How did Zhan Wushuang know? The ancient god blood can destroy all living creatures under the sacred mountain. Zhan Wushuang's gaze was deep and sharp. So what if the 7 great masters' bloodlines fused into one body? In front of the ancient god blood, it will be nothing but ashes. He held the sword with both hands, and the whole sword was shaking violently. It was as if there was a power that even he could not control. Accept your fate, Suyu. You will eventually be a skeleton under my feet, a whetstone for me to become an emperor. Zhan Wushuang swung the blood sword down with difficulty. Boom, boom, boom. The heavenly court shook violently, and the void tumbled violently. Even the sacred mountain was shaking. Suyu only felt a formless and fatal sword energy pressing down on him. The halo between his eyebrows dissipated rapidly, unable to withstand a blow from the sword. Suyu's gaze was calm. He held the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations tightly and shouted coldly, "Great scythe of 10,000 tribulations, open!" The great scythe of 10,000 tribulations was burning with golden flames. The handle of the green vine wood, after being burned, had turned into a sparkling metallic color. The most amazing thing was that among the 9 Tao Tai heads on the scythe, one had an extra golden head. That golden Tao Tai head was exactly the same size as the other heads. However, the eyes of the Tao Tai seemed to be alive. With a cold and indifferent gaze, they looked down at the world quietly. This was the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations activated by the 7 great masters' bloodlines. Go! Suyu waved the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations fiercely. In an instant, 9 beams of destructive black light swept across. However, as soon as they shot out, they were destroyed and dispersed by the formless sword energy. The golden head was not in a hurry, and it opened its eyes. A faint light beam as thick as a finger shot out from its eyes. However, as soon as the light beam appeared, the sacred mountain, which was shaking, began to retreat. Just by appearing, it had forced the sacred mountain to retreat. Chapter 2765. The golden thread's power was unparalleled. The peerless slash of the ancient god blood sword became abnormally difficult under the threat of the thin thread. Zhan Wushuang's eyes were filled with shock and panic. His hands were trembling. It wasn't his hand that was trembling, it was the ancient god blood sword that was trembling. Zhan Wushuang let out a furious roar when he saw the thin thread coming at him. He forced himself to pull himself together. I am the Emperor of Destiny. I will not lose. Whoosh, however, the cruel reality was, the golden thread mercilessly pierced through the ancient god blood sword. With a bang, the ancient god's blood sword shattered into pieces. The intense explosion tore Zhan Wushuang's royal robes into shreds, and his entire body was mangled. Although his life was not in danger, he was in a sorry state. Suyu said calmly, "Tell me again, what kind of emperor are you?" "An emperor begging for food." Zhan Wushuang's eyes widened in anger. "Suyu!" "Humph!" Suyu snorted heavily and pressed forward with the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations in his hand. Zhan Wushuang's heart trembled as he forcefully resisted. However, his dragon soul was gone and the ancient god blood sword was gone. He only had that bit of cultivation left. How could he be a match for Suyu? As soon as they exchanged blows, Suyu grabbed his neck. "This is the destined emperor?" Suyu asked coldly. As he said this, he raised his hand and slapped him hard. Pa! The crisp sound of a slap resounded throughout the entire heavenly court. The court master and the others watched from afar, pushing and shoving each other, but no one dared to step forward to help. Suyu was too terrifying. Who dared to step forward? They could only watch helplessly as Zhan Wushuang was beaten up like a beast by Suyu. Zhan Wushuang's initial anger, followed by numbness and then sorrow. In the end, he was still inferior to Suyu. Even with the help of that lord, he was still no match for Suyu. Suyu's 10 slaps had completely awakened Zhan Wushuang, allowing him to rediscover the trauma of being dominated by Suyu. It's over, Zhan Wushuang. Suyu was too lazy to continue fighting. The scythe of 10,000 tribulations pressed against his neck and said indifferently, "Go and repent to Han Xian." He was about to use the scythe of 10,000 tribulations to end his life. Suddenly, a soft sigh seemed to explode in Suyu's ears. His 7 domains were thrown into chaos, and even his sovereign bloodline was thrown into chaos. Without the support of the sovereign's bloodline, the scythe immediately returned to its original state. Suyu was greatly shocked. What kind of person could get so close to his back without being able to detect him? He turned his head and saw that it was an old man wearing a long robe with 9 dragons embroidered on it. His hair was combed neatly and meticulously. His facial features were plump, and his eyes were slightly sunken. His eyes were filled with the vicissitudes of life. It was as if he had walked through countless prehistoric eras. Suyu stared at this person, his heart trembling inexplicably. Even his voice couldn't help but tremble. "You are Ancient God Jiulong?" He had never seen Ancient God 9 Dragon's true body. However, after controlling the divine 9 Dragon Cauldron for so many years, he could faintly establish a connection with Ancient God 9 Dragon. The elder who had suddenly appeared was Ancient God 9 Dragon. It was the Ancient God Jiulong that Suyu had always longed to see but had never been able to. At this moment, Suyu had many questions that he wanted to ask him. For example, why had Ancient God 9 Dragon chosen him as his successor? Why hadn't he appeared for so many years? All these years, he had disappeared in the Tao Abyss. What had happened? But there were so many questions that he didn't know where to start. "Let him go," Ancient God 9 Dragon said indifferently. Suyu stiffened slightly. He stared at Ancient God 9 Dragon's indifferent eyes, his heart inexplicably cold. It was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water over him. He had been excited to see Ancient God 9 Dragon, but Ancient God 9 Dragon had been unmoved to see him. Suyu withdrew the scythe and looked at Ancient God 9 Dragon quietly. The ancient god who had turned his fate around had appeared in front of him for the first time. Zhan Wushuang was released. He staggered over to Ancient God 9 Dragon and knelt on one knee in shame. "Your disciple is incompetent and has embarrassed you, Master." "What?" Everyone in the heavenly court was shocked. Ancient God 9 Dragon was Zhan Wushuang's master? In other words, Zhan Wushuang was Ancient God 9 Dragon's successor? But that wasn't right. If he was the successor, what was Suyu? Suyu stood where he was, his mind unusually blank. He suddenly felt that perhaps he had made a mistake from the very beginning. "It doesn't matter. You have received too little of my teachings, and your strength is limited. It's normal that you are inferior to others." Ancient God 9 Dragon looked at Zhan Wushuang with a hint of concern. It was completely different from the indifference he had shown Suyu. Zhan Wushuang's sorrowful state of mind was restored to tranquility. He looked at Suyu with a look of pity and sighed. "You don't understand what I said." "Don't understand what?" Ancient God 9 Dragon looked at Suyu coldly again. "Your name is Suyu, right?" Suyu nodded. His eyes, which had regained focus, were silent. "Can you return the divine 9 Dragon Cauldron?" Suyu's heart trembled. He could refuse anyone who asked for the divine 9 Dragon Cauldron. But there was one person he couldn't refuse. That person was ancient god Nine Dragon himself. Su Yu took out the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron with a heavy heart. As soon as it appeared, the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron flew away from his palm happily and landed in its palm. 8 crystallized flying dragons circled ancient god Nine Dragon excitedly, letting out incessant dragon roars. Su Yu had never experienced such a state before. His heart was filled with bitterness. The divine Nine Dragon Cauldron had never truly belonged to him. It had always been ancient god Nine Dragon's possession. Ancient god Nine Dragon patted the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron lightly. Instantly, dozens of drops of blood essence that had been fused with it for hundreds of years were all slapped away. Those were the drops of blood essence that Su Yu had dripped into the cauldron over the years. Now they were all wiped clean. Su Yu immediately lost all connection with the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron. Everything. Su Yu clenched his right fist in his sleeve. Then, he loosened it helplessly. The divine Nine Dragon Cauldron had only been in his possession for 200 years. In the hands of ancient god Nine Dragon, it had been billions of years. In comparison, Su Yu had only gained control of it for a brief moment. Wasn't it reasonable for him to take it back now? However, what Su Yu couldn't accept was that ancient god Nine Dragon had given the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron to Zhan Wushuang. Some accidents caused you to lose 200 years. From now on, make good use of it, ancient god Nine Dragon said. Zhan Wushuang was pleasantly surprised. He cast a triumphant look at Su Yu. He even waved the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron in his hand. Su Yu's heart had already turned cold. He said, "Can you tell me why? Why did he say that Zhan Wushuang had lost the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron for 200 years? Ancient god Nine Dragon said indifferently, "I should tell you about this. Actually, Zhan Wushuang is the successor that I have chosen. You were just an accident." Chapter 2766. Su Yu was expressionless. In truth, even if ancient god Nine Dragon hadn't said anything, he had a faint premonition. Perhaps he was not the successor of ancient god Jiulong. Because from start to finish, he didn't seem like an inheritor. Apart from accidentally obtaining the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron, there was nothing else. The people of the heavenly court had never treated him as a successor. He had thought of every possible way to snatch the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron from him. If ancient god Nine Dragon truly viewed him as his successor, who would dare to do such a thing? But hearing it from ancient god Nine Dragon's own mouth made it seem especially real, cruel, and merciless. Now that he thought about it, back then, he roared in the forest and was smashed by the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron. It was just an accident that happened by chance. It was his wishful thinking that he was ancient god Nine Dragon's successor. Looking at Zhan Wushuang. Born to be an emperor. From the moment he was born, he was blessed with great luck. When it was born, the souls of 3,000 kings and emperors paid homage. He ascended the throne at the age of 3 and defeated the strong at the age of 5. He annexed the mortal empires of the central state and made tens of thousands of countries submit to him. When he was 10 years old, he established the peerless martial sect, sweeping through all the forces in the region and forcing the 3,000 sects of the middle state to bow their heads. At the age of 15, he besieged the imperial palace of the central prefecture and challenged the central prefecture's king. In comparison, the first half of Su Yu's life was too ordinary. It was so ordinary that it didn't even have the slightest bit of brilliance. Compared to Zhan Wushuang, he was like a speck of dust. He was the chosen successor of ancient god Jiulong. In addition, give me the heavenly throne of heaven and earth and the emperor's slaying sword. They are for Zhan Wushuang, ancient god Nine Dragon indifferently said. Su Yu did not say a word. He took out 2 items and tossed them over. This question could be considered solved. Zhan Wushuang's imperial 4-piece set had been created by ancient god Nine Dragon. Zhan Wushuang regained his confidence after getting the 2 items and the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron. He sighed and said, Because of a momentary mistake, I wasted 200 years. Zhan Wushuang sighed with emotion. If the divine nine-dragon cauldron had fallen into his hands from the very beginning, then all of Su Yu's achievements today would belong to him. Of course, this was only his wishful thinking. To Su Yu, the divine nine-dragon cauldron was just a support. What was given to him was merely the 8 great laws. Apart from that, everything else was obtained by Su Yu one step at a time, braving countless trials and tribulations, as well as many life-threatening dangers. Su Yu looked at ancient god Jilong calmly and said, "What else do you want to take back?" Ancient god Nine Dragons pointed at the many ancient god descendants behind him. "Take their things and return them all." "All right," Su Yu said without hesitation. The descendants of the ancient god Jiu Yu had the divine flame and the black mountain, the ancient god Jin Xian's abyss beast. He returned everything that he had taken from the descendants of the ancient gods. Not a single item was left. "And then?" Su Yu asked calmly. His face was very calm, so calm that it was completely unlike the expression that a person in such a situation should have. Even a little bit of loneliness, a little bit of sadness, and a little bit of anger were normal. Only that calmness was exceptionally strange. Ancient god Jilong scanned Su Yu from head to toe and said calmly, "Then, leave the heavenly court. You are not welcome here." After all, this was the homeland of the ancient gods. What was Su Yu? What right did he have to stay here? Su Yu nodded and said, "I will return the divine nine-dragon cauldron to you. The ancient god relics I obtained can be considered the interest for borrowing ancient god nine-dragon for 200 years. I've already returned everything to you with interest." Su Yu gripped the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations and drew a golden line between him and ancient god Nine-Dragon. His eyes were cold and indifferent, without the slightest trace of emotion. "From now on, we have nothing to do with each other." Su Yu's heart ached as he said these words. He had imagined meeting ancient god Nine-Dragon many times, and he had wanted to express his gratitude many times. However, he had never imagined it. The day they met was the day they severed all ties. Ancient god Nine-Dragon glanced at the golden line on the ground, then turned around indifferently and said without turning his head, "We have nothing to do with each other in the first place. Let's go while I'm not in a bad mood." Su Yu did not look at ancient god Nine-Dragon again. From now on, they had nothing to do with each other. From the next moment they might become enemies. "Let's go." Su Yu, Yu Xiangwan, and Hong Yao left the heavenly court under the mocking gazes of the descendants of the ancient gods. The court master said respectfully, "Ancient god, this child has ancient god Gold Xian's divine artifact, the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations, the bloodline of a ruler, and the secret technique of the heavenly book characters. Why don't we?" Ancient god Nine-Dragon said indifferently. After all, he received the teachings of the human ancestor. Consider it a favor to the human ancestor. "But that's all," ancient god Nine-Dragon said faintly. His divine Nine-Dragon cauldron had been forged by imitating the human ancestor's life cauldron. In a sense, he also owed the human ancestor a favor. That was why he hadn't killed him. Otherwise, Su Yu would have been nothing more than an ant in his eyes. He had already killed him just now. "I will stay here for a period of time and do my best to help ancient god Jiu reincarnate. Has everything been prepared?" The court master nodded deeply. "Everything else has been prepared. Only the ancient god's body should be on its way." Ancient god Nine-Dragon's nostrils flared. "Wushuang, come with me." Amidst the envy of the crowd, Zhan Wushuang followed ancient god Nine-Dragon into the secret chamber to receive pointers. Zhan Fian's eyes were filled with envy. "I wonder how strong ancient god Nine-Dragon is now. Will he surpass the human ancestor of the last era?" The human ancestor was an existence that dominated the world at the beginning of the last era. After the Tao Abyss had been silent for an era, what kind of existence would it be? The court master shook his head. The human ancestor was an existence that could trample on two sacred mountain heavenly suns. No one in the past can surpass him. Jean-Fien agreed deeply. Her face was full of regret. It's a pity that the human ancestor was alone. In the end, he was powerless and perished in the mortal world. The court master's eyes were filled with a hint of deep meaning. Did the human ancestor really perish? Rulers and ancient gods were able to find a way to be reborn in the new era. Why did an all-powerful existence like the human ancestor never return to the mortal world? You mean? Jean-Fien's pupils shrank as she gasped. The court master shook his head. It's just a guess. Don't take it seriously. Meanwhile, outside the heavenly court, Yu Xiangwan looked at the calm Su Yu and said, "Brother Su, don't be sad." Even Hong Yao was biting her red lips. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. Su Yu looked at the dark void expressionlessly and said, "I'm not sad. I just feel relieved." All along, the ancient god Nine Dragon was an existence that weighed heavily on his heart. Now, he had let go of everything. Yu Xiangwan clenched her fist. I finally understand why the ancient god corpse ancestor asked me to leave the heavenly court. There are so many ungrateful people there. Even the ancient god Nine Dragon is like that? How disappointing. Su Yu shook his head slightly. I'm afraid that the ancient god corpse ancestor asked you to leave for another reason. It's not just because of their bad character. How could a dignified ancient god give such a reminder for such trivial matters? Yu Xiangwan thought so. She looked at Su Yu's empty hands and sighed. It's a pity that the divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron has accompanied you for 200 years and never left. Now it has been taken back. Chapter 2767. Yu Xiangwan was puzzled. The divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron had been taken away. Brother Su, do you have other plans? Yu Xiangwan asked. Su Yu nodded. I already have 7 of the 9 great master domains. If I can find the other 2 domains, the divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron will be the real divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron. The divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron made by the ancient god Jilong only had 8 master domains. According to Yun Yazi, it was an incomplete divine artifact. Therefore, the person who longed for the 9th master was undoubtedly the ancient god Jilong. If he could get the master domain of the 9th master first, and then the master domain of the Death Master, then all 9 domains would be gathered. Only then could he make the real divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron. He already had the materials to make the divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron a long time ago. The melted liquid, the liquid formed by the burning of the path fire and combined with countless treasures and heavenly objects. He was ready. All he needed was one last thing. The 9th master? Yu Xiangwan had never heard of it. Besides, the Master of Death is still sealed underground in the heavenly court. How can I get him? Hearing this, Su Yu furrowed his brows. Indeed, it would be very difficult to get the bloodlines of the last 2 masters. Let's wait and see. Su Yu's eyes darkened. If necessary, even if the ancient god Jilong tries to stop me, I will try. Yu Xiangwan gasped in astonishment. Did Su Yu mean to fight the ancient god Jilong? That was the leader of the 8 great ancient gods, ancient god Jilong. Where did Su Yu get the courage to fight the ancient god Jilong? He shook his head. I hope it doesn't come to that. In his opinion, Su Yu was no match for the ancient god Jilong. That's up to him, Su Yu said lightly. They sped all the way to the remnant domain. It took them half a year to go back and forth. The dim yellow light of the holy mountain was getting closer and closer. There was no longer darkness in the void. Everything had been replaced by a dim yellow light. Brother Su, did you notice that there seems to be some broken islands in the void? Yu Xiangwan's dark blue eyes looked into the distance for a while. Su Yu nodded. Yes, I noticed them long ago. In the past, the void was shrouded in darkness, so it was impossible for him to probe very far. However, under the illumination of the sacred mountain, the existence hidden in the darkness could not be hidden at all. Along the way, Su Yu discovered more than just small islands. They also found many huge severed limbs. In terms of size, it was only 1% of the size of the remnant realm. What was even more noteworthy was that there were living beings on it, and they were very powerful. Su Yu's eyes lit up and he said, "The void doesn't only have 8-star civilizations. Wasn't our outer realm also a small region attached to the 8-star civilizations? Apart from that, there were also heavenly quartz battleships. When the last era was destroyed, only the large islands were destroyed. Many small islands were spared, so it's normal," Su Yu said. "I just don't know if there are any great figures from the last great era." Su Yu recalled the human ancestor's corpse. Ever since he entered the 8-star civilization from the outer realm, he had never appeared again. Now, only a ruined region was left, and there was no trace of it. No one knew where he was right now. Yu Xiangwan thought for a while. If there's really a powerful person, maybe they'll choose to get closer to the remnant realm. After all, that's the largest island left. Su Yu nodded slightly. It would be a good thing if more strong people could be attracted here. The combined strength of everyone would be more likely to resist the destructive light of the holy mountain. They talked as they hurried on their way. Finally, after a few days, they arrived at the border of the remnant realm. Swoosh! Suddenly, a flying treasure pierced through the void and rushed out from the border of the remnant realm. Su Yu recognized it and said, "Isn't that Chu's flying battleship?" He activated the Yuan-level domain and moved the flying battleship that had fled far away. On it, Chu was covered in blood and looked anxious. Suddenly, the sky and earth were spinning and his expression changed. When he saw Su Yu in front of him, he was overjoyed. Disregarding his injuries, he jumped off the ship and said, "Holy Body Su, you're finally back." Su Yu's heart skipped a beat, and he had a very bad feeling. Who was Chu? He was Qin Xiener's personal guard. He was seriously injured, so Qin Xiener could imagine. What happened? Su Yu asked in a low voice. Chu clenched his fists and said, "Holy Body Su, as soon as you were invited away by the people of the Heaven Court, they sent someone over, saying they wanted to invite Master along." The Master he mentioned was naturally Qin Xiener. Su Yu's eyes turned cold. If they wanted to invite Qin Xiener, they could have invited her together. Why would they invite him alone when he was not here? And then, Su Yu clenched his fists in his sleeves slightly. Nothing must happen to Xiener. Master felt that there was something wrong with them, so he did not agree. "He said he would wait for you to come back," Chu said bitterly. That group of people finally revealed their true colors and attacked Duo Mu and Mengling. Duo Mu was killed, Mengling was seriously injured and unconscious, and Master was also injured by them. Su Yu's eyes were full of murderous intent. It turned out that the Heaven Court had two plans. They wanted to trick Su Yu into going to the Heaven Court and take the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron. They also wanted to trick him into leaving and capture Qin Xiener. "Go on." Su Yu forced himself to calm down. The more critical the moment, the more he could not panic. Chu cried bitterly. Fortunately, the cauldron reacted quickly and immediately organized people to fight against them. However, we had too few masters, and they were all descendants of the ancient god Jiulong. In the battle that lasted for several months, we suffered heavy casualties, and Master was finally captured. And our remnant realm was completely destroyed by them. Even the defensive formations that were already broken were not spared. They were all destroyed. Su Yu's face sank and he said slowly, "How long has it been since they captured him?" 10 days ago. Now there are still a few descendants of the ancient god Jiulong ruling the remnant realm. They want to enslave all the creatures and escort them to the Heaven Court. Many of my brothers in the cauldron used their lives to escape and go to find you. Originally, Chu had expected that Su Yu might have met with misfortune in the Heaven Court. However, he did not expect that he would come back alive. "Let's go." Su Yu took a step forward and the void trembled. It was as if the world was moving. The next moment, they appeared above the remnant realm. 100 battleships, densely packed, blocked the sky above the remnant realm. The black muzzles of the cannons were aimed at the remnant realm. As long as any living creature rushed out, it could be killed with a single shot. At this time, on the land of the remnant realm, thousands of masters of the Heaven Court were hunting down the strong men of the remnant realm. Anyone who resisted was killed on the spot without mercy. Su Yu's robe billowed, and his silver hair danced in the wind. His pair of eyes were bursting with amazing murderous intent. The murderous intent was so heavy that even the white battleships nearby noticed it, and they all turned around and aimed at Su Yu. Chapter 2768. It's Su Sheng. How is he still alive? Oh my God, he's not dead. From the brief exclamation, it could be seen that they knew about the Heavenly Court's plan and knew that Su Yu would die in the Heavenly Court. Su Yu murmured, "Then, you are not innocent." Su Yu put his palms together slowly. Creak. Every warship was wrapped in a mass of space, and then the space was constantly compressed. Little by little, the warships inside were compressed into scrap metal. The people on the ships were terrified and tried to break the space to escape. But none of them succeeded. Together with the warships, they were finally compressed into a thin piece. Yu Xiangwan had no mercy and said coldly, "The people of the Heavenly Court should be killed. They were too shameless, too despicable. Kill." Su Yu swooped down. At that moment, the Star Rain Empress and a group of people were hiding. They were being chased by several strong men at the peak of the road master level, one of whom was covered with faint dragon patterns. His eyes stared greedily at the Star Rain Empress's beautiful face under her long golden hair. "Little girl, I'm taking you back to the Heavenly Court to eat and drink. Why are you resisting?" The Star Rain Empress's face was slightly pale. She huddled in the corner with her 2 guards, putting up a last-ditch struggle. The descendant of the ancient god smiled wickedly. "I said a few months ago that when I break the seal, I must have a taste of you. No one can stop me." He waved his hand and dismissed the 2 guards beside him. "Go somewhere else." The 2 of them chuckled. "Yes, Lord Subduing Dragon. Any descendant of the ancient god Jilong could get a name with the word dragon attached. This person was indeed a descendant of the ancient god Jilong." Fu Long chuckled and slowly approached. The Star Rain Empress trembled like a little sheep, panicked and helpless, feeling desperate. But just as Fu Long was about to close in, a cunning light flashed in the Star Rain Empress's eyes. Time freeze. The rest of the Time Dominator's domains were taken away by Su Yu, but hers was not. Over the past few months, she had been hiding her strength and determined not to use the Time Domain. Now that she suddenly used it, Fu Long was caught off guard. He was frozen on the spot. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the Star Rain Empress and her 2 guards immediately rushed up to deliver a fatal blow. However, just as he was about to succeed, Fu Long, who was clearly frozen in place, grinned. "I lied to you." With a flick of his fingers, he killed 2 guards. Then, he grabbed Empress Star Rain's wrist, and with a sinister smile, he pulled her into his arms. "Little beauty, come here." Empress Star Rain let out a soft cry, her face filled with despair. The Tao Lord energy in his body trembled as he prepared to self-destruct. She would rather die than have her chastity destroyed and become a slave for others to vent their anger on. However, Fu Long sneered, "If I let you die in my hands, then I will lose too much face." With a light press of his palm, he suppressed the power that Empress Star Rain was about to unleash. No! Star Rain Empress truly despaired. She couldn't die even if she wanted to. But all of a sudden, the pulling force of the dragon loosened. Queen Star Rain looked up and saw Fu Long standing there with a stiff expression. He stared behind her with fear written all over his face. Empress Star Rain turned her head to look, and an extremely familiar face came into view. Su Yu. It was Su Yu. Fu Long's lips trembled, and he said in a trembling voice, You are back." He hurriedly let go of Empress Star Rain and kept retreating. With a stiff expression, he said, This is all a misunderstanding. It was the instructions of the higher-ups of the heavenly court. We were just following orders. Su Yu stepped forward indifferently and took a light step forward. Bang! Fu Long's legs were immediately shattered into a mist of blood by the formless realm, and only half of his body was left. Even so, Fu Long still had a strong desire to live. He couldn't die. If he could survive until the next era, he could become a being of the same level as the new era's old ancestor. Misunderstanding? Trying to take advantage of my star reign is also a misunderstanding? Su Yu said coldly. Fu Long took out a space jade charm. As long as he crushed it, he could be transported back to the battleship in the outside world. Crack! He crushed it, and a mass of space light enveloped him, and began the transportation. Fu Long's heart relaxed, and the fearful expression on his face immediately turned ferocious. Su Yu, you destroyed my legs. I will make you pay for this with your woman. Sooner or later, I will make her. But as he spoke, Fu Long could no longer continue, because the space light was slowly disappearing. The transportation failed? Fu Long's heart skipped a beat. Su Yu said lightly, If you are referring to those spaceships outside the realm, well, they have been destroyed. Do you have any other means of transportation? Fu Long sucked in a breath of cold air. A total of 100 battleships were all destroyed. Why didn't any of them sound the alarm? How terrifying was Su Yu? Holy body Su Yu, you treat me like a fart. Let me go. I don't dare, I really don't dare. Fu Long said hurriedly. Su Yu's eyes were indifferent. You are the descendant of the ancient god Jiulong. Can you leave some dignity for yourself? When he went to the heavenly court, he had made things difficult for all the descendants of the rulers. Out of respect for the ancient god Jiulong, he had never touched them. He didn't expect his descendants to be such unbearable people. Fu Long knew that he had no way out, so he simply became fierce. I will not let you go even if I become a ghost. The energy in his body was rioting, a sign that he was about to self-destruct. However, he didn't succeed. Because Su Yu gently pointed his finger, and Fu Long's divine power was completely imprisoned. You have to get my permission before you become a ghost, Su Yu said indifferently. His eyes shone with soul light, and he immediately began to search his soul. The search was in progress. He saw Qin Xianer being taken away by a young girl. That young girl was none other than the descendant of the ancient god Jiulong, who had tried to capture Yanran, the woman in the golden sedan. It's her. Su Yu's murderous intent soared. Back then, Su Yu had been merciful because she was the descendant of the ancient god Jiulong. She was not grateful, and even participated in the capture of Qin Xianer. Bang! Due to his anger, his soul probing had become extremely violent. With a scream, Fu Long's soul was destroyed. Su Yu looked up at the sky, his eyes full of murderous intent. The descendant of the ancient god Jiulong. He had treated the one who had hurt him the most. All of you deserve to die. Su Yu growled in a low voice. Sobbing, the Star Rain Empress threw herself into Su Yu's arms in fear and sorrow. Brother, you are finally back. Sister Xianer has been taken away. Su Yu gently stroked her head. She had indeed suffered a lot to be able to resist until now. Come with me. Don't let anyone who intrudes into the remnant domain go. Su Yu said, full of murderous intent. A powerful space field erupted around him, sealing off the entire remnant domain. Chapter 2769. Somewhere in the west, a descendant of an ancient god with a face full of pimples was sitting on an armchair. Hundreds of people were scattered in front of him. Most of them were the core members of the Cauldron. The ground was already flowing with blood, and dozens of heads were still open. The scene was full of blood. The descendant of the ancient god leisurely sipped his tea, crossed his legs, and said lightly, "Obey the heavenly court, and I can guarantee that you will survive the destruction of the era. I will give you another 10 breaths to think about it." After he finished speaking, the two followers behind him immediately stepped forward and pressed the King of Darkness, who was a vice Cauldron Venerable One, to the ground. A sharp axe was pressed against his neck. "Otherwise, your head will fall to the ground," the descendant of the ancient god said lightly. "Although the heavenly court is merciful, you are all sinners, and you cannot be left alive. Well, the countdown of 10 breaths begins." An hourglass was placed on the ground, and the sand inside flowed down evenly and slowly. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 7 breaths, 8 breaths, 9 breaths, 10 breaths. The King of Darkness remained silent and had no intention of obeying. The descendant of the ancient god frowned slightly. "I say, your cauldron organization is actually very weak. Why are you so persistent?" He really didn't understand. As far as he knew, the cauldron was founded by Suyu, but he rarely managed it. The entire organization was not strong. For some reason, their loyalty to Suyu was beyond imagination. Even after killing dozens of people, no one was willing to betray him. It was incredible. King of Darkness smiled. His face was filled with disdain. "You will never understand the meaning of a savior appearing when the people are in despair, when the heavens can't be expected, when the earth can't be begged, when the gods don't pity them." Which of the members of the cauldron was not a creature that Suyu had saved from despair? For them, Suyu was more important than the Emperor Heaven and the Earth, and more important than the gods. People could die, but they would not go against their belief. Is that so? The descendant of the ancient god narrowed his eyes. His patience was obviously exhausted. Dozens of people were willing to bow down. Looking at the remaining hundreds of people, their eyes were very calm. They were like prisoners who were going to die calmly, and they never thought about surviving. It was futile to continue to threaten them. "Forget it, I wanted to use the power of your cauldron to rule all the creatures. Since you believe in Suyu, go to the underground and join him," the descendant of the ancient god said lightly. Without the cauldron, they could still enslave the creatures of the broken region. It was just a lot more troublesome. He waved his hand and said indifferently, "Send them on their way. I want to see if there will be another savior." The two subordinates nodded and immediately raised their hands and slashed down. A cold light flashed. A mass of blood splattered. A bloody head rolled to the feet of the ancient god's descendant. However, the descendant of the ancient god. Dragon subduing? The ancient god's descendant was shocked. He hurriedly stood up and looked around. Who is it?" The remaining light suddenly caught a glimpse of someone. When he took a closer look, his soul couldn't help but leave his body. Sue Sage Physique? He thought that he was seeing things and tried his best to look over. When he was sure that he was not seeing things, his heart felt as if it had fallen into a cold pond, and it was incomparably cold. He took a deep breath. "You are the one who died." Suyu walked forward slowly without saying a word and flicked his finger. "You are the one who died." Puff. Fu Long immediately turned into a cloud of dust, his body and soul destroyed. The King of Darkness and the others were overjoyed and knelt down on one knee. "Greetings, Cauldron Master." Suyu stood with his hands behind his back and said indifferently, "Go and save the others. If you capture them, what should we do?" The King of Darkness asked. Suyu's tone was full of murderous intent. "No captives." The King of Darkness was shocked. He meant to kill them all. Next, the remnant realm launched a desperate counterattack. With Ding as the leader, he organized tens of thousands of troops to attack various places, killing all the people of the celestial heavens who attacked, leaving no one alive. With the help of Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan, the people of the broken region were unstoppable. The people of the heavenly court saw that the situation was not good and wanted to escape. Only then did they realize that the entire broken region had been locked down and there was no way to escape. What was more desperate was that it was completely useless to surrender and save their lives. The other party was ruthless and did not spare a single one. It lasted for 3 days. There were corpses everywhere in the broken region. Blood stained the ground and covered the sky. Everywhere was ruined after the war. Suyu stood in the void and stared at the broken region where the defense formation had been destroyed and the land had been reduced to ruins. Hatred surged in his heart. What did he do wrong? He just wanted to lead the few living beings there and use that broken continent to survive the final apocalypse. The heavenly court was so rich, what could they not have? Why did they have to deprive them of the barren land? Why did they have to destroy their small and pitiful wishes? At this time, the King of Darkness, Chu, Empress Star Rain, and all his old friends led the hundreds of millions of people in the broken region and stood in front of Suyu. Our home has been destroyed, Suyu said slowly, his heavy voice falling into everyone's ears. Do you want to die in silence or do you want to fight with me? The broken region could no longer protect them. When the end of the world came, what awaited them would be eternal death. No life could save them from death, the returning ruins. Fight! Where the king goes, we go. We are willing to follow the king to destroy the enemies of the heavenly court and take revenge. King, let's fight. The destruction of the broken region made the common people united. They only had one thought. Instead of dying in the end of the world, it was better to use their hot blood and their sharp swords to give the enemy a heavy blow. Even if they died, they had to make the enemy feel pain. What's more, who was leading them? It was the sacred body of the human race. It was the hope of the common people. It was the sacred body chosen by the will of the common people in the world. Suyu nodded slowly, stepped on the void and said deeply, "Good. Everyone, follow me and fight to the death." His voice shook the void. It attracted the deafening response of countless creatures. Fight the heavenly court and destroy all the enemies. The heavenly court is not destroyed, I swear not to return. In the passionate roar, the entire broken region was like an awakened giant beast, in the dim void, rushing towards the heavenly court. It was full of endless killing. It was as if everyone on it was the reincarnation of the god of slaughter. All the large and small islands along the way, all made way, and the creatures on them stared at the mighty broken region of the heavenly court in astonishment. The void was vast and mighty, and the gods avoided it. Its momentum was so great that it was unprecedented since ancient times. The journey of several months passed in a flash. At the end of the dim world, a silver-white warship came into view. The mighty waves caused by the broken region had already formed a complete wave, shaking the heavenly court. In the heavenly court, in the high-level cave residence. Chapter 2770. He had already lost count of how many times he had meditated, but every time, he would wake up in less than 3 days. It was as if something bad was about to happen, causing his soul to feel uneasy. He had only encountered such a situation once in his life. That time, he was a defeated general, and the king had ordered his family to be executed. He was locked in the heavenly prison, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. That was the lowest point of his life, the most desperate moment of his life. In the end, he watched as his family members were beheaded one by one. He watched as they died in front of him. Wasn't the feeling of unease similar to before? Emptiness, the situation has been decided, so why do I still feel uneasy? Jean Fien did not understand. The 8-star civilization, which was a huge threat, was only left with a remnant region that was struggling at death's door. The rest were all small islands, not worth mentioning. More importantly, the heavenly court was impregnable. There was a defensive formation with heavenly book characters on the outside, and ancient god Nine Dragon on the inside. Who in the current emptiness could fight? This feeling of unease came out of nowhere. Clang, suddenly, on the stone table in front of him. The teacup placed flat on the table started to slowly move. Then, it fell to the ground with a bang and shattered. "HM?" Jean Fien glanced at it and was slightly puzzled. But then, more and more things fell down, hitting the ground with loud bangs. Finally, Jean Fien clearly felt his body start to tilt. What's going on? He stood up in shock. Boom! Suddenly, the heavenly court started to shake violently. He immediately flew up and maintained his standing posture. At this moment, over 100 purple communication jade pendants came from his waist. Jean Fien was in charge of defense. The purple jade pendants ringing meant that there was an invasion alert. Usually, only one piece would ring. But right now, there were 100 of them ringing at the same time. Even when the heavenly court was first established, it had never encountered something like this. Even when it was at its weakest, when it was surrounded by the people sent by the rulers, there had never been such chaos. For a moment, Jean Fien did not know what to do. He casually grabbed a piece and crushed it. An extremely terrified voice came from inside. "Enemy attack!" The voice suddenly stopped. There was a shrill scream, and the sound of the ship being smashed into pieces. His expression changed slightly, and he continued to crush the rest of the jade pieces. The result was the same. They were all sending the same message. Enemy attack. Many people didn't even have the time to send a message before they were crushed. In the remnant sound, Jean Fien seemed to hear the roar of a colossal creature. Shocked, he immediately rushed out of the secret room and arrived above the heaven court. In the end, what he saw made him gasp. A behemoth that was twice the size of the heavenly court was stirring up countless waves in the void and rumbling over. It was a continent in the dusky yellow of the apocalypse. It was like a huge beast that had come out to hunt for food. The patrolling heavenly court members were all mercilessly crushed by the giant creature. He couldn't even escape. Jean Fien's pupils constricted. Broken domain! Could it be that the people they sent didn't enslave all the living beings in the remnant domain? Or did Su Yu go back and regain control of the ruined region? However, how would he dare to come back to the heavenly court? Ancient God Nine Dragon was presiding over this place. Prepare for battle. But no matter what, the people from the remnant regions had come with ill intentions, and the heavenly court was not to be trifled with. He immediately sent out a message. Suddenly, the giant cannons on both sides of the heavenly court appeared one after another. Each of those black giant cannons could erupt with the terrifying power of a peak Earth master. Hundreds of giant cannons, when all fired at once, the power was unimaginable. The remnant domain was bound to be destroyed. Stop immediately, and let those who are qualified to speak step forward. Jean Fien scolded. However, the remnant domain did not stop, and it had no intention of stopping. Jean Fien's eyes flashed with ruthlessness, and he shouted in a deep voice, "Everyone, open fire!" Boom! Boom! Beams of purple light shot out explosively. Every beam of light blasted through the remnant domain. Hundreds of beams passed through the remnant domain, forcibly shattering the remnant domain into hundreds of small island fragments. When the fireworks stopped, the remnant domain was silent. The surface of the ruined domain was completely silent. There was no resistance, not even a sound. "It's over." Jean Fien was a little puzzled. Although he was very confident in the attack of the giant cannons of the Heavenly Court's warships, but the other party was killed so easily, it was a little unexpected. "Let's go up and investigate," Jean Fien said uncertainly. A group of Heavenly Court members gathered their courage and went up to investigate the hundreds of small islands. Moments later, they all transmitted back. "We didn't find anything, not even a corpse." "Not even a corpse?" Jean Fien's heart skipped a beat, and his first reaction was, "There's a trap." Rumble. Suddenly, the void above Heavenly Court fluctuated violently. A gigantic rift that traversed the void appeared. This was an enormous spatial crack that could only be opened by a yuan-level spatial domain. Inside the crack, numerous figures poured down from the sky like a torrent of seawater. The Heavenly Court members that were patrolling outside Heavenly Court were immediately drowned by the sea of people. They didn't even have the chance to scream before they were annihilated. Angry roars sounded in the sea of people. "Kill the members of Heavenly Court! Cut off all means of retreat, fight to the death." They had given up everything in this battle, even destroying the remnant domain, there was no way out. Other than fighting a bloody battle, other than attacking Heavenly Court, there was no way out. Jean Fien was shocked and he roared, "Open fire!" Boom boom. Hundreds and thousands of cannons rumbled and shot out again. Every beam of light could kill an entire group of people, directly blasting them into nothingness. However, there were too many enemies, so many that it was impossible to kill them all. The emptiness that had just been cleared was immediately filled by the sea of people. Jean Fien's scalp went numb, and he immediately retreated into the Heavenly Court's defensive formation. He wanted to use this formation to kill the enemy from a distance. After all, the power of this formation had been tested countless times, and it couldn't be broken. However, as soon as this thought appeared, a sea of blood appeared above Heavenly Court. The sea of blood poured down, dripping onto the defensive formation. That indestructible defensive array was actually corroded away. Seeing this, Jean Fien's heart thumped. Su Shin body. This was the blood sea horizon that Su Yu had just mastered. What made him feel even more threatened was that the formation had been broken, and the enemy had poured in like the sea. There were too many of them, enough to fill the entire Heavenly Court. One could imagine what kind of place they passed. The first to be attacked was the mountain of ancient god Jin Xian. In just 10 short breaths, Jean Fien witnessed the mountain being swallowed up by the sea of people. Only Jin Haozhen and a few descendants of the ancient gods escaped in panic. The rest were all buried in the sea of people. Chapter 27:71. He retreated rapidly, his heart thumping wildly. Perhaps, even in his wildest dreams, he had never thought that there would be a day when the remnant realms would attack the Heavenly Court. As he retreated, he commanded, "Activate the Armageddon army." He shot a purple firework into the sky. The firework illuminated the sky, suppressing the dim light of the sacred mountain. Huge commotion occurred in various parts of Heavenly Court. The ground in various parts of the Celestial Court split open, revealing many gaps. Those gaps led to the battleships of Heavenly Court. Countless experts swarmed out, the weakest among them was a Tao Lord. Earth Lords were the main force. In the blink of an eye, the number of experts on the ground was no less than that of the remnant realm. They were all dressed in silver-white armor, and like a silver flood, they quickly clashed with the invading remnant realm army. They were all elites that Heavenly Court had prepared for many years. Their goal was to fight against some powerful existences when the epic restarted. Who would have thought that they would be used against the remnant realm beings? When the two torrents collided, the silver torrent swallowed the multicolored torrent with overwhelming force. The experts of Heavenly Court were all in groups of 2. The 2 groups were separated by a certain distance, and each held a strange Tao artifact. The 2 Tao artifacts continued to shoot out destructive lightning bolts. They charged into the crowd and immediately turned a large number of remnant realm beings into ashes. Several Cauldron higher-ups were the first to be killed as they were leading the charge. As a result, the attacking troops lost their commander and became headless dragons, instantly falling into chaos. Using this chance, the white-armored flood sped up their harvest. The remnant realm beings that had been so powerful just a moment ago were immediately wiped out in large numbers, showing signs of defeat. Empress Star Rain and Yanran led a group that resisted tenaciously. However, they could not withstand the attacks of the elite army that the other side had carefully trained. Their own people were killed by the lightning, forcing them to retreat again and again. In less than 10 minutes, the remnant realm beings had already retreated behind ancient god Gold Arcane Mountain. In contrast, the white-armored flood was unstoppable, relying on the wondrous lightning to reap large numbers of lives. Empress Star Rain panicked when she saw this. Damn it! She activated the Time Ruler bloodline, locked onto the 2 white-armored experts at the front, and shouted, "Time freeze!" As expected, the 2 of them froze. Yanran cooperated well and stepped forward, each holding a sword and beheading both sides. Moreover, he even snatched the Nirvana artifact from their hands. She tossed one to Empress Star Rain, and after the two women activated it, they borrowed the astonishing thunder and lightning inside to counterattack. Boom boom, while the time freeze was still in effect, he killed another group of people and snatched back 2 Dao artifacts, and handed it over to the others. They also had 4 Dao artifacts, and by relying on their numbers, they were actually able to resist the attack of the flood of white armor. The white-armored experts knew how powerful the lightning was, so they didn't dare to force their way through. This gave the people from the remnant realm a chance to attack from afar. Slowly, with their advantage in numbers, they managed to push back the flood of white armor. Empress Star Rain shouted, "Charge back!" She and Yen Ran led the troops and attacked back, chasing the white armor flood and forcing them to retreat. However, such a scene was extremely rare. As a whole, the living beings of the remnant realm were being forced to retreat again and again. On the other hand, Empress Star Rain's troops charged into the flood alone. Unknowingly, their path of retreat was surrounded by a torrent of white armor on both sides, trapping them in a circle. From afar, they looked like a lone island in the middle of a flood. By the time Empress Star Rain realized that the situation was bad, it was already too late. After being surrounded, the white flood attacked from all directions. The number of casualties increased rapidly. At a speed visible to the naked eye, they were being surrounded, their numbers decreased layer by layer. Not long after, the several 100,000 people were reduced to around 10,000. The Nirvana artifacts in Empress Star Rain and Yenron's hands had already been destroyed during the battle. Both of Yenron's hands were covered in blood, and her right arm was charred. There were faint traces of lightning left behind. When the enemy's lightning struck her just now, one of the remnant realm's living beings leapt over and used his own body to block the attack. That was why she only suffered superficial wounds. Looking at the countless corpses of her companions falling, Yenran felt sad. Heavenly Court's strength is within my expectations. Before they came, everyone was mentally prepared. Heavenly Court had accumulated an entire era's worth of resources, and it was also the home of the 8 ancient gods. How could they have no strength? In contrast, the 8-star civilization of the remnant realm had been destroyed, and many resources had been destroyed. Even daily training was a problem. Wanting to defeat the Heavenly Court with numbers was tantamount to a fool's dream. Therefore, they had cut off all means of retreat this time and were prepared to die. Empress Star Rain continued to perform the time realm, causing the enemy to slow down in a small area and causing harm to them. However, there were too many enemies. Her efforts were like a drop in the bucket. With only 10,000 people left, they couldn't hold on for long. It seems that this time, we are really going to die here. Empress Star Rain's face was slightly pale. She had overused her Dominator bloodline. Yenran nodded. Su Yu is commanding the overall situation. He can't take care of us. Empress Star Rain's expression was complicated. While making the last struggle, she said, "In fact, I envy Sister Xian very much." Looking at the battlefield all over the sky and the flying blood, her eyes were complicated. If Su Yu is willing to risk everything to start the sky-toppling battle for me, I can die without regrets. Hearing this, Yenran looked at Empress Star Rain in surprise and said, This isn't brother-sister love, is it?" Empress Star Rain pursed her lips. At this moment of life and death, there was no need to hide. "Yes, I like Su Yu. It's a pity that I will never have the opportunity to let him know." Looking at the thousands of people left in front of her, Empress Star Rain was full of regret and nostalgia. Originally, she should have died in the Battle of the Masters and become a small abandoned pawn in the conspiracy of the Time Master. However, after meeting Su Yu, life became exciting again. Every day was full of color, no longer gloomy, no longer lonely. "Aren't you brother and sister?" Yenran reminded her. Empress Star Rain said faintly, "How could I really not know how many descendants the Time Master has? He lied to me from the beginning. How could I really not know?" It turned out that from the beginning, she knew Su Yu was not the descendant of the Time Master at all. He was the descendant of the ancient god Jiulong. After all, Su Yu had performed several kinds of realms in succession. Was this something a descendant of the Time Master could do? She just lacked help, and Su Yu wanted to use her strength. Therefore, she played dumb and pretended not to know anything. However, in the end, she really relied on Su Yu and could no longer leave him. Chapter 2772. The Star Rain Empress lowered her head and sighed. It's not a bad thing to bring her underground. Keeping her in the human world will only make things difficult for Su Yu. He only has Sister Xian in his heart. Yanran said sympathetically, "Sigh, you have fallen in love with someone you shouldn't have." From her observation, Su Yu was not a person who would fall in love easily. He had always been devoted to Xian. He had never touched other women. If the Star Rain Empress confessed her feelings, it would only add to Su Yu's troubles and pressure. At this time, the White Torrent had completely surrounded them. There were only a dozen people left around the two of them, making their final struggle. Those who surrender will be spared. A strong man leading the team stared at the two women with excitement in his eyes. These two people should be people of high status among the creatures of the Remnant Realm. If they were captured, they would be rewarded handsomely. The Star Rain Empress and Yanran looked at each other and saw the determination in each other's eyes. The two women did not retreat. Instead, they stepped forward and shouted, "We will not return until the Heaven Court is destroyed." The 10 people around them were also excited. In desperation, in adversity, they shouted, "Destroy the Heaven Court!" Their figures were as small as dust, submerged in the silver torrent. The Star Rain Empress and Yanran were fighting to the death, but they were facing the cold thunder. The leader of the White Torrent waved his hand indifferently. Fulfill their wish. 2 rows of strong men in white armor activated the Nirvana artifact and released dozens of destructive thunderbolts, giving them the last blow of their lives. However, at this moment, the world suddenly darkened. No one knew when, but a thick dark cloud appeared above the Heaven Court. The dark clouds were like a thick black mirror illuminating the earth with an incomparably pitch-black light. Ordinary people would only feel a little cold under the dark light. However, the dead bodies on the ground, illuminated by the dark light, all came back to life. Their eyes were empty, with only a little flame of hatred flickering in them. The Corpse Clan. They are all the Corpse Clan. There were screams of horror in the crowd. In the sky, under the cover of the Heaven Shroud, Yu Xiangwan held the underworld scepter and shivered. Brother Su, this is all I can do. Activating the sacred artifact in such a large area would cause great damage. The ground immediately fell into great chaos. Suddenly, a dense horde of corpse race beings appeared in the white flood. Even though the dead had been turned into Corpse Clan members, their strength was greatly reduced. However, in order to create the effect of dense lightning, the White Torrent had all gathered together. The corpse race suddenly appeared under his feet. How could he guard against it? After the corpse race appeared, they immediately attacked the people of the Heavenly Court with their consciousness from when they were alive. With a casual bite, they could transform the white armor into zombies. Then, the new zombies would continue to attack their former comrade. Similar changes were taking place on the entire battlefield. It was like a chain reaction. In an instant, the White Torrent was thrown into chaos. Countless corpses appeared among them, causing them to lose the will to fight the creatures of the Remnant Realm. Under the pursuit of the corpses, they could only run away in panic. Seizing this opportunity, the creatures from the Remnant Realm immediately launched a counterattack. With the momentum of a torrent, they attacked the scattered warriors in white armor and tried to snatch the Nirvana artifacts in their hands, turning them into their own. Outside, there was a flood of living beings from the Remnant region, and inside, there was the corpse race's pursuit. The majestic White Torrent was quickly defeated, and it was beaten to the point of abandoning its armor. The Star Rain Empress and Yanran, who had been prepared to die, barely managed to survive. They rejoiced and cheered up again. Star Rain, there are some words that you should say while you are still alive. Yanran laughed and touched the head of the Star Rain Empress. You are so beautiful and cute. Maybe Su Yu will be attracted to you? The Star Rain Empress blushed and pushed her hand away. Stop it. Kill the enemies. After saying that, she picked up a Nirvana artifact and rushed into the army. Seeing this, Zhang Fian's face darkened. Just when she was at her wits' end, the court master and several other deputy court masters arrived. Looking at the defeat in front of him, the court master's old face turned livid. Su Yu, you ungrateful B*****starred. We, the heavenly court, have been extremely benevolent to him, but he still came to destroy us. He probably felt that the ancient god Jiulong had taken everything but his life, which was a form of charity. As for them deceiving him of the divine nine-dragon cauldron and slaughtering the creatures of the remnant realm, finally, they had captured Qin Xiener. These were all negligible. They could do anything to Su Yu. If Su Yu dared to resist, he would be ungrateful. However, if the heavenly court was so easy to deal with, why would it still exist until now? The court master took out a treasure that he was the only one in his custody. After activating it, the sound of the 9 mountains resounded in unison. Furious roars erupted from the bottom of the mountains. The roars were earth-shattering and powerful. The 2 armies that were fighting each other trembled. Looking up, there was a crack under each of the 9 mountains. From each crack, a 1,000-foot-tall puppet giant of different colors walked out. The giant's combat power was astonishing. Each of them was at the level of an early-stage heavenly law master. Their strength was second only to a master. The 9 puppets appeared and immediately beat their chests, letting out deafening roars. Boom! One of the puppets in the shape of an ape-man leaped tens of thousands of feet into the air and stomped on the living beings of the remnant realm. In an instant, millions of living beings were killed on the spot. The resulting shockwave sent the living beings of the remnant realm flying back dozens of miles. The casualties were extremely heavy. The other 8 heavenly law master puppets also attacked at the same time. Wherever they passed, there were casualties everywhere. In just 10 breaths, the damage they caused was even more than that of the white-armored torrent. The living beings of the remnant realm were filled with despair. They gritted their teeth and fought. A senior member of the Cauldron shouted, "The puppets must have weaknesses. Attack!" However, as soon as he said that, the ape-man puppet swept its long arm and turned him and the overlords around him into a mist of blood. The white-armored overlord was overjoyed. He worked with the 10 puppets to counterattack and reap the lives of the living beings of the remnant realm. They had just seen the light of victory. They immediately fell into an even more desperate situation. Both the living beings and the corpse clan were vulnerable in front of the puppets with absolute power. Their counterattack landed on the puppet, but it didn't even cause the slightest bit of damage. They could only watch as the 10 puppets rampaged. Their numbers were decreasing rapidly. 1/3 of them were dead or injured compared to when they first arrived. Countless living beings let out sorrowful roars. They wanted to die, but they lacked powerful strength and treasures. As a result, they could only be slaughtered. Zhang Fian heaved a sigh of relief and smiled viciously. Ants trying to shake a tree. Stupid! You've followed the wrong master. However, at the moment when the living beings of the remnant realm were in danger, the earth suddenly shook. The entire heavenly court shook violently. Chapter 2773. All of a sudden, the world spun and the huge warship whimpered. The defensive formation on the surface flickered rapidly, as if it could not bear the burden. The court master and the other upper echelons of the heavenly court paled in shock. What's going on? Zhang Fian, go down and take a look. The higher-ups still needed him and a few vice hall masters to manage the situation, and the manpower that they could spare was very limited. Zhang Fian did not dare to hesitate and immediately shot towards the bottom of the battleship. When they arrived at the past, the scene that greeted his eyes left him in disbelief. A giant golden Xuanwu was flipping the entire battleship. Ancient god gold profound sacred artifact? Zhang Fian's expression changed as she recognized it. That holy artifact should be in Su Yu's hands, right? Zhang Fian broke out in cold sweat. Speaking of which, since arriving at the heavenly court, Su Yu had disappeared without a trace. Could he be here? As the saying goes, what one fears will come true. There was a faint sound of something tearing through the air behind him. Zhang Fian turned her head to look, and her soul almost left her body. Su Yu was standing with his arms crossed. His eyes were cold and filled with killing intent. Zhang Fian shivered and immediately ran without thinking. You tricked me into coming to the heavenly court and took the opportunity to capture my wife. Do you think I will let you go? Su Yu hated the most. Zhang Fian was definitely one of them. He was the one who had lured Su Yu away. A chill ran down Zhang Fian's spine. As he ran, he screamed, I don't know. I didn't do it. He doesn't know? Was that even possible? As she shouted, Zhang Fian charged forward again. The court master and the vice court masters were right in front of him. His face was pale as he said, Court master, Su Yu is down there. Save me quickly. However, to his despair, the court lord and the others saw him. To be precise, when they saw Su Yu, who was behind him, they all started to retreat. Zhang Fian turned her head to look. Su Yu's ice-cold face was just inches away from her. He blew out a breath of air. Turning into thousands of sharp blades, they abruptly swept past. Zhang Feiyan didn't even have time to scream before her body and soul were destroyed. Seeing this, how could the court masters dare to stay any longer? Didn't Zhang Wushuang, who was tyrannical and invincible, almost died tragically in Su Yu's hands? For a moment, everyone was running away. Su Yu looked at them coldly, then weaved his palms together, and several drops of blood appeared. Then, with a flick of his finger, the blood exploded and turned into a sea of blood that sprayed over. The court master's face turned pale. He clenched his teeth and tore off one of his arms. In an instant, a large amount of blood splattered out, turning into a blood-colored bell that hung upside down in the middle. Crash, the sea of blood pressed down. None of the other deputy court lords were spared, and all of them melted into the blood sea. Only the court lord's bell managed to block the blood sea. Seizing this opportunity, he fled for his life with a pale face. Su Yu stared at him, but it was too late for him to chase after him. Rumble, the golden Xuanwu unleashed its might and finally succeeded in overthrowing the heavenly court's ship. In the blink of an eye, the 10 rampaging puppets fell to the ground, off the warship, and into the void. Countless beings from the remnant realms also fell into it. Seeing this, Su Yu finally took out the great sickle of 10,000 calamity. Activating its full power, it revealed 10 heads, one of which was golden. The 10 heads simultaneously burst forth with world-destroying light, as well as a golden line. Swoosh! Together with the creatures from the remnant realms that fell outside, all 10 puppets were killed, leaving nothing behind. The reason for this was because the heavenly court was the only place that could accommodate the creatures from the remnant realms. If the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations was used on the warship, the heavenly court would be completely destroyed. Therefore, the next best thing was to use the golden Xuanwu to separate the 10 puppets from the warship. However, the situation at the moment did not improve. On the contrary, it was getting worse. Although the 10 puppets appeared for a short time, the damage they caused was extremely serious. More than 60% of the creatures from the remnant realms were killed. In addition, Su Yu had to kill many creatures from the remnant realms just now. In the end, less than 30% were left. In the battle with the white-armored strong man, the situation was completely reversed. The white torrent was ferocious, and in a short time, the remaining creatures from the remnant realms were wiped out. Soon, the entire battlefield was left with only a white torrent. There were only a few scattered creatures from the remnant realms. The battle between the two sides ended with the complete annihilation of the creatures from the remnant realms. The court lord, who was hiding in the distance, chuckled. An ant trying to shake a tree. The creatures from the remnant realms were only brave, but their overall strength was too low. It was impossible to shake the position of the heavenly court. Although the heavenly court also suffered a particularly large loss, not only losing 10 puppets, but also more than half of their strong men. But in the end, they won. However, at this moment, Suyu said lightly, "It's almost enough." He took out the exquisite Xuanji and instilled the strength of the ruler into it. This was the sacred artifact of the Life Master. In the past, in the domain of the Life Master, all creatures were immortal and immortal. It was all because of another function of the exquisite Xuanji. It could revive the dead on a large scale. He held the exquisite Xuanji in his hand and slowly lifted it up. The exquisite Xuanji immediately burst out with a shocking emerald light. Under the cover of the light, all the corpses of the creatures from the remnant realms were resurrected on the spot. In a short moment, the dead creatures from the remnant realms were all resurrected. They woke up in a daze, and when they saw the white-armored powerhouse standing right in front of them, their expressions changed drastically, and they immediately launched an attack. The battle between the two sides was about to start again. The difference was that all the creatures from the remnant realms were resurrected, and the white-armored strong man who had the absolute advantage was immediately surrounded by an endless sea of people. They struggled in panic and fought. However, they could not stop all the creatures from the remnant realms from resurrecting in an instant. In just an hour, the white-armored strong man was killed until only a few were left. This time, there was no one to stop him. The creatures from the remnant realms attacked every corner of the heavenly court like a torrent. The 8 mountains fell quickly. Many descendants of the deities were driven out of the mountains. Only the ancient god Jilong Mountain was left. Numerous torrents rushed up, and towering flames erupted from within the mountains. Those were all the 8 yuan level domains. In an instant, the creatures on the mountain were blasted into nothingness. For a moment, the creatures behind immediately stopped and did not dare to go up again. Su Yu's eyes were indifferent. "Go!" As he spoke, he condensed 7 yuan level domains in his palm and pressed them down fiercely. Most of the flames were suppressed on the spot. In this way, many creatures took this opportunity to rush up again. However, as soon as they reached the top of the mountain, an 8-colored giant dragon raised its head and stared at them coldly. That was also a giant dragon condensed by the yuan level domains. As soon as he spat out his dragon breath, the 8 elemental realms rolled out along the mountain. Rumble! Suddenly, the many creatures from the remnant realms on the mountain were destroyed in an instant. Not even their dregs were left. The giant dragon shouted majestically, "This is the land of the ancient gods, mortals, retreat or you will be killed." Chapter 2774. Suyu floated in the air, his eyes cold. Ancient god? Humph! The name of the ancient god Jilong could no longer cause any ripples in his heart. When he confessed everything and asked for everything back, Suyu had already severed all ties with him and no longer had anything to do with him. So, he was the one behind all this. Suyu was indifferent. His eyes were filled with sharpness. He never thought they would become enemies. He just didn't expect it to be so soon. When they met again, they were already enemies. "Then, I have no more scruples," Suyu said slowly. The great scythe of 10,000 tribulations in his palm was completely unfolded, and it slashed down at the ancient god Jilong Mountain below. 10 beams of destructive light slashed down from above. The 8-colored giant dragon looked up and spat out a strong dragon breath, roaring, as the successor of the ancient god Jilong, "How dare you attack him? You are unfilial!" The two collided and destroyed each other. Suyu swooped down, his face cold. "Now you say I am his successor? Do you think I should be respectful to him again? Why didn't you say so when you took my divine 9-dragon cauldron and took everything? Why didn't you say so when you tricked me to leave and captured my wife? His voice shook the sky, full of anger. The great scythe of 10,000 tribulations in his hand seemed to sense his emotions, and the 10 Tao Tai heads all made a harsh sound. It was waved. The great scythe of 10,000 tribulations slashed down. A golden line and 9 beams of black light merged into one, shooting down like a sharp arrow. Unfilial is unfilial. Why do you have so many excuses? The giant dragon roared, spitting out a strong dragon breath. This time, the dragon breath only resisted the sharp arrow for a moment. It was penetrated by the sharp arrow, which pierced through its mouth and shot out from its neck. The giant dragon immediately collapsed, turning into scattered yuan-level domains that slowly dissipated. The giant dragon dissipated, with a look of pity in its eyes. You are so sad to oppose the ancient god Jielong. Humph! Suyu flew down and completely destroyed it with a stomp. Then, the countless creatures of the remnant domain surged up the mountain like a tide, occupying everything above. After a moment, most of the areas of the ancient god Jielong mountain were occupied. Only the great hall of the ancient god was in the center. There was an incomparably powerful layer of defense outside the hall. It was even more powerful than the heavenly book's defense outside the heavenly courtyard. No matter how many creatures there were, they couldn't break it. Inside the hall, a young girl stretched half of her body out. Her brows furrowed slightly. Seeing her, Su Yu's murderous intent soared. This woman was none other than a stranger. It was the descendant of ancient god 9 dragons. She was also the woman who had captured Sienna. It's you. Su Yu flew down and stood on the defense. He did not hide his surging killing intent at all. The young girl looked up, her eyebrows furrowing even deeper. There was not the slightest trace of fear. Su Yu. The girl looked at the fallen heaven and shook her head expressionlessly. The bravery of an ordinary man will never amount to much. She had a nonchalant expression on her face. It was as if the defense outside the hall had given her an indestructible defense. I advise you to go back. Don't struggle pointlessly, the girl said indifferently. Su Yu swung the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations in his hand. When the fused light struck the defensive array, it merely left behind countless ripples. There was no sign of it being successfully broken. The girl shook her head and sighed softly. You have no self-awareness. I really don't know how you got to where you are today. It's all luck, isn't it? Her eyes were full of contempt and disdain. I was wondering why the ancient god would choose a person like you as his successor. Su Yu silently put away the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations and said indifferently, If you dare to say that when my holy body is opened, I will believe you. The girl snorted. The real strong will not mention the glory of the past. Only incompetent weaklings like you will keep living in the past. Su Yu, who had lost his holy body, was nothing in her eyes. Su Yu nodded lightly. You misunderstood me. I mean now. An old oil lamp slowly appeared on top of his head. A layer of 9-colored light flowed out of his body. In the blink of an eye, Su Yu turned into a golden-haired, 9-colored figure. The terrifying aura that shook the void came crashing down with the momentum of the wind and clouds. Staring at the holy body that suddenly appeared, the girl's face stiffened little by little. Her pupils dilated little by little, and her eyes were full of disbelief. Aren't you unable to use the holy body anymore? The girl's lips trembled. It was as if she was playing with a dying tiger and suddenly realized that the tiger was actually pretending. In fact, it was intact, and she was right under the tiger's claws and teeth. Su Yu touched the formation with the tip of his foot, and the dense 9-colored energy under his foot easily shattered the formation, revealing a huge gap. Su Yu crossed his arms in front of his chest and slowly landed in front of the girl. Can you repeat what you just said to me again? Su Yu stared at her calmly. The girl trembled all over, and with a scream, she immediately shrank back into the hall. Then, she tried to close the door of the hall. However, before she could close it, a 9-colored energy blocked the giant door, preventing it from closing. The girl's scalp went numb, and she ran for her life. The outer layer of defense was set up by the ancient god Jiulong himself. According to what he had said, apart from him, no one should be able to break through the void at this moment. However, Su Yu had broken it. The terror of the holy body was far beyond her expectations. How could she know that after Su Yu's heart was replaced, he had been reborn? The holy body was already at the lower level. It was far beyond what it had been in the past. Clang! The giant door was pushed open by the tyrannical force, and the girl was scared out of her wits. She fled all the way to the side hall in the depths of the hall. Here, several people with dragon patterns on their bodies gathered together to exchange martial art. Because of the previous defense formation, many movements in the Heavenly Court, including the overthrow of the Heavenly Court, were unknown to them. At this moment, they were still focused on their discussion. The 9 dragons' heart art passed down by the ancestors is really extraordinary. In just a few months, I can more smoothly mobilize the power of the bloodline in my body, an older descendant of the ancient god said with emotion. Yes, a single lesson from the ancient god is far better than 1,000 years of hard work. If that Su Yu comes again, I will probably be able to fight him. Haha, what's so great about Su Yu? Isn't he just relying on a sickle and some secret techniques of the heavenly book? He didn't come to our ancient god Jiulong Mountain. If he had, I would have killed him on the spot. That's right. It's the descendants of the other 8 mountains who are too incompetent. They were suppressed by a fake successor. What a disgrace to the descendants of the ancient gods. After a few months, it was still difficult for them to forget the scene of Su Yu suppressing the heavenly court and intimidating many descendants. Chapter 2775. Exactly. Look, no matter how fierce Su Yu was, he didn't dare to come to our Jiulong ancient god mountain. He probably knows that the descendants of ancient god 9 Dragon are extremely powerful and doesn't dare to provoke us. The 4 descendants were talking shamelessly. The girl hurriedly ran in, her face as pale as wax. Long Rui, why are you so flustered? This is disgraceful. The older ancient god descendant reprimanded. The girl's name was Long Rui. Her beautiful face turned pale as she said anxiously, Quickly go and find the ancestor. Sage Su is knocking on our door again. The expressions of the 4 descendants changed, but they immediately calmed down. He still has the guts to come? To be honest, even I admire his courage. A descendant said disapprovingly. The elder descendant's eyes were also filled with calmness. Long Rui, you must remain calm. So what if Su Yu came? He won't be able to do anything. Long Rui was so anxious that she couldn't catch her breath. Sacred physique, Su has already led the living beings of the remnant realms to occupy the celestial heavens. What? Only then did the expressions of the 4 ancient god descendants change. Long Rui, you must be joking. Not only do our heavenly court have many cultivators preparing for war, but we also have many puppets of the master of the heavenly law. How could we be occupied? Someone said in disbelief. Long Rui looked even more anxious. Why would I lie to you? The only thing left is our ancient god 9 Dragons Mountain. The 4 descendants of the ancient gods slowly stood up, their faces filled with uneasiness. There's no need to worry too much. An ancient god descendant said calmly, surnamed Su dares to ascend our ancient god 9 Dragon Mountain? Hearing this, the descendants calmed down again. Isn't that right? Last time, when ancient god 9 Dragon wasn't here, he didn't even have the guts to ascend our ancient god 9 Dragon Mountain. Now that ancient god 9 Dragon is here, even if you gave him 100 guts, he still wouldn't dare to take a single step. Long Rui was extremely anxious. He's already here. What? Everyone was completely shocked. He ascended our ancient divine dragon mountain? How dare he? Everyone, there's no need to panic. Ancient god 9 Dragon personally laid down the defenses, so what if he comes? When the ancient god finishes his business, it will be the day of his death. That's true. Long Rue, don't scare yourself to death. With that, the 4 descendants of the ancient gods sat down again. Long Rue stomped her feet anxiously. Alright. You guys stay, I'll go. She flashed to a corner of the side hall. There was a teleportation array there. She immediately jumped onto it and activated it. His expression was one of extreme panic. The 4 descendants of the ancient gods looked at each other and finally realized that something was wrong. Long Rue, don't tell me you're telling me that the one surnamed Su came in? The elderly ancient god's descendant stood up and guessed. Long Rue turned around and was about to reply to them. Suddenly, his pupils constricted and his face paled. This was because Su Yu was slowly walking out of the side palace's entrance. At this moment, he had already restrained his sacred body. Seeing that indifferent face, Long Rue screamed and immediately activated the array formation to escape. The 4 descendants of the ancient gods followed his gaze and looked at the door. When they noticed Su Yu, their expressions changed drastically. Surname Su. No, Sage Su. How did he get in? Their faces were filled with terror. Where was the slightest bit of arrogance from before? Run. This was the only thought in their minds. The group of people immediately fled frantically towards the teleportation array. Wait for us. Regardless of whether it was the elder or the arrogant descendant, they all shouted anxiously. However, how could Long Rue dare to wait for them? She immediately activated the array and teleported away. When the 4 descendants of the ancient gods arrived, the space array had already cooled down. The 4 of them jumped onto the array and immediately activated it. However, how could they make it in time? Su Yu walked over step by step. As he gradually approached, the 4 descendants of the ancient gods were extremely terrified. Sage Su, this is the ancient god Jilong Mountain, and we are all descendants of the ancient god Jilong. You'd better think carefully about what you want to do, the young descendant of the ancient gods said. Su Yu's face was indifferent as he said slowly, think carefully? When you captured my wife, did you think carefully? No. They felt that everything was reasonable. In their eyes, Su Yu and Qin Xianer were just like ants. What could they do to them? Sage Su, this is not the point. The point is, we are the descendants of the ancient god Jilong. You'd better think carefully about what you want to do to us. The young descendant of the ancient god asked in fear. Su Yu shook his head coldly. I really have nothing to say to you. At this moment they still felt that Su Yu was in the wrong. They did not feel that they had a deep hatred for him for capturing his wife. Su Yu no longer wanted to say anything to them. With a wave of his palm, the great scythe of 10,000 calamity appeared and swept towards them. The 4 descendants of the ancient gods' faces changed dramatically as they screamed in horror. Fortunately, with the delay of the young descendant of the ancient god, they had successfully activated the space array. At the critical moment, the array was finally activated. With a soft sound, a light flashed, and they were teleported away. In the deepest part of the mountain, in a secret place, Long Rue, who had narrowly escaped death, jumped out of the transportation array. Her pretty face was covered in cold sweat. Her chest rose and fell, showing the turmoil in her heart. Phew, that was close. Long Rue let out a long sigh of relief. Thinking of Su Yu's divine body, her whole body could not help but tremble, and her mind was in a mess. We all miscalculated. Sage Su did not lose the qualification to activate the divine body. He was just hiding it all along. Thinking of this, Long Rue's heart was filled with fear and regret. If she was given another chance, she swore that she would definitely stay far away from his wife, Qin Xianer. She would not even touch a hair on her. Now, Su Yu bore a grudge against her. Fortunately, she had finally escaped to the underground. The ancient god Jilong was inside. With his protection, she should be able to escape this crisis. Creak. Suddenly, the space array was activated. Long Rue was shocked and hurriedly fled. But when she saw the figures teleported out of the array, she let out a long sigh of relief. It was the 4 descendants of the ancient gods. Plop, however, the 4 descendants of the ancient gods fell to the ground one after another. Their heads rolled to Long Rue's feet like watermelons. The cut was as smooth as a mirror, as if it had been swallowed by something. Long Rue's scalp went numb. Not daring to stay any longer, she turned and fled. Swish, swish. Among the 4 headless corpses of the descendants of the ancient gods, the souls of the 4 descendants of the ancient gods rushed out. They were the descendants of the ancient god Jiulong, who were naturally proficient in some areas and could protect their souls. Hence, each person and 4 souls fled for their lives. Before they could get far, they heard the space array behind them activate again. Turning around, they saw Su Yu holding the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations, teleporting over. At this moment, the 4 of them hated that they did not have an extra pair of legs as they fled in terror. Su Yu followed behind them unhurriedly. If he had attacked, the 5 of them would have been dead long ago. They would not have been able to escape underground. The reason why he had held back was because he wanted to find the ancient god Jiulong through them. Chapter 2776. He chased after them unhurriedly. Finally, deep underground, there was nowhere to run. In a spacious underground hall, he saw a few descendants of the ancient gods who had escaped to this place. He had met ancient god Nine Dragon. In the center of the hall there was a place that looked like an altar. Several shining formations overlapped and floated up and down, illuminating the gloomy basement with colorful light. Ancient god Nine Dragons was on the altar. Qin Xianer was unconscious, lying quietly on the altar. The surface of its body flickered with the heavenly book's characters. Ancient god Nine Dragons gathered 8 origin domains in his palm, but when they got close to Qin Xianer, they were immediately repelled by the heavenly book characters. He couldn't do anything to it at all. These were the words of the heavenly book. This was what Su Yu had done to Qin Xianer before he went to the heavenly court. It was the strongest defense he had learned from the Tome of Darkness. Trying to break it with brute force was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. This was the reason why Su Yu wasn't too anxious. Qin Xianer might have been knocked unconscious by Long Rue, but it would be very difficult to hurt her. From the looks of it, even ancient god Nine Dragon would find it extremely difficult to unravel the heavenly tome characters without harming Qin Xianer's body. Seeing Su Yu approaching, the souls of Long Rue and the 4 descendants of the ancient gods were scared out of their wits. "Ancestor, save me!" Their exclamations finally reached the top of the altar. Only then did ancient god Nine Dragon stop and turn his head. When he saw Su Yu, he ordered nonchalantly, "You were the one who inscribed the heavenly book on her, weren't you? Untie it." His tone made it seem as if Su Yu was his slave. Su Yu's face was full of coldness, and he said indifferently, "All right." Seeing that Su Yu had submitted, Long Rue and the rest of them calmed down. After all, how could Su Yu dare to act rashly in front of the ancient god Jiulong? Didn't he still have to be a coward and obediently listen to orders? Shuar Su Yu was walking over. Moreover, he had used the Yuan-level space domain to arrive in front of the soul of an ancient god's descendant in a single step. He grabbed the top of his head with one hand. Ancient god Nine Dragon slightly frowned. "Let go." Pa, Su Yu exerted a slight force in his hand, and his soul was destroyed on the spot. Long Rue and the 3 souls screamed and ran towards the altar in fear. However, the altar was isolated by several formations, so they couldn't escape. "Ancestor, save us! Save us!" The remaining 4 begged anxiously. Ancient god Nine Dragon's eyes chilled. "I told you to let go. In other words, how dare you disobey my orders?" Su Yu clapped his hands and said calmly, "I let go. It's just that I didn't control my strength well enough." Ancient god Jiulong looked at Su Yu coldly. "Kneel down." "Fine, kneel." Su Yu nodded and took a step forward. It seemed like a simple step, but he crossed it in the blink of an eye. He then grabbed the soul of an ancient god's descendant and pressed him to the ground. He said indifferently, "Your ancestor told you to kneel. Didn't you hear him?" With a single press, the soul was crushed on the spot. After killing 2 descendants of the ancient god Jilong in a row, the latter was finally enraged. "Suyu, you are provoking me." With a wave of his hand, the formation stopped temporarily. Long Rui and the other 2 souls were overjoyed and immediately flashed inside. However, he had yet to enter. Su Yu's eyes emitted a threatening soul light that flashed for an instant. With 2 consecutive miserable screams, the souls of the 2 descendants of the ancient gods vanished into thin air. Only Long Rui managed to escape with half of her body inside. However, only half of her body escaped, because Su Yu had already arrived and grabbed her by the shoulder with one hand. "Come out!" He grabbed Long Rui, who was screaming in despair, and grabbed her by the neck. Ancient god Jilong's eyes flashed with murderous intent as he shouted mightily, "Let go!" Su Yu's eyes turned cold. He squeezed hard and crushed Long Rui on the spot. Both her body and soul were crushed together. Among the many descendants of the ancient gods, he hated Long Rui the most. Her death was not to be regretted. Ancient god Jilong was furious. He grabbed the air. Resurrection. The light of life enveloped the surroundings. With the last breath of the descendants of the ancient gods, they were resurrected from the dead. The bodies of the 5 descendants of the ancient gods were reconstructed. However, at the moment of success, Su Yu's face turned cold. Resurrection. The same Yuan level life domain erupted. The 2 life domains of the same level collided. The effect was not superimposed but chaotic. The descendants of the ancient gods, who were about to be resurrected, were immediately crushed by the chaotic life domain. Moreover, the last whiff of their breath dissipated. Even if they wanted to be resurrected, there was no way for them to be completely destroyed. "Did you ask for my permission to be resurrected?" Su Yu said coldly. Ancient god Jilong raised his head, his eyes burning with anger. "Su Yu, I regret it. I regret it. Why did I let you go?" He took a step forward. The formation around the sacrificial altar was completely activated. Ancient god Jilong stepped down, surrounded by 8 dragon souls. Each of them represented an elemental level domain. Su Yu said calmly, "You regret it. Shouldn't he be regretting arresting his beloved wife?" From the top to the bottom of the heavenly court, from the ancient gods to the descendants, no one felt that they were wrong. Su Yu was wrong. It was Su Yu who was ungrateful and ungrateful. That was why he was in this state of karma. Ancient god Jilong sighed deeply. "How could the Rin ancestor be related to you?" Su Yu was not afraid. He walked up the stairs slowly and said coldly, "Yes. Which eye of the Rin ancestor was blind to help you forge the divine 9-dragon cauldron?" Their eyes met, exuding intense murderous intent. Ancient god Jilong shook his head. "Stubborn. I have no choice but to clean up the mess for the Ren ancestor." Roar. The 8 essence grade domain dragons around him roared as they charged over. 8 Yuan level domains were unleashed by ancient god Jilong. How terrifying was their power! Even the 8 great masters would have to retreat if they were here. However, Su Yu stood where he was, motionless. Only when the Yuan-level domains bombarded him did a layer of 9-colored light slowly condense on the surface of his body. The 8 domain dragons rushed over, but they were firmly blocked by the 9-colored light, unable to approach his body in the slightest. Ancient god Jilong stopped and stared at the layer of 9-colored light, his face full of surprise. "Holy body? You?" He raised his eyes and looked at Su Yu. For the first time, there was a touch of surprise in his eyes. Very surprising, right? Su Yu was completely disappointed. Ancient god Jilong obviously knew that Su Yu had the holy body of the human race. He also knew that Su Yu had lost the right to have the holy body. That was why he was unscrupulous and regarded Su Yu as a lowly ant. Now that he realized that Su Yu's holy body was still there, he looked at Su Yu seriously for the first time. Ancient god Jiulong had revered this ancient god Jiulong for 200 years. The look in ancient god Jiulong's eyes changed. Finally, he restrained the murderous intent in his eyes and said, "I didn't mean to make things difficult for you. The spouse you chose is the reincarnation body chosen by the ancient god Jiuyo. I hope you understand." This was probably the first time ancient god Jiulong had explained himself, even though his explanation was laughable. Chapter 2777. Forgive my ass. Su Yu cursed, which was rare for him. The 9-colored light shone brightly, turning into a sharp arrow that pierced through. Ancient god Jiulong frowned slightly and said indifferently, "I'm being polite to you because of your human sacred body. Don't think too highly of yourself." Ancient god Jiulong stretched out his palm and pinched Su Yu's wrist with 2 fingers. He easily clamped Su Yu's wrist. No matter how much Su Yu used his sacred body, he couldn't break free. Ancient god Jiulong casually flung Su Yu into the wall, causing him to slam against it. Su Yu slid down, his whole body aching. Even the 9-colored power on the surface of his body was weakened. Was this the real strength of ancient god Jiulong? Even with the full power of the human sacred body, he couldn't compare to 2 fingers? No. How could Su Yu admit it? How could he accept it? Seeing Su Yu's murderous intent, ancient god Jiulong stood on the stairs with pity in his eyes. "Don't embarrass yourself in front of me with the lower-level sacred body of the human race. If I want to kill you, I'll kill you like a dog." Ancient god Jiulong waved his hand and said, "Get lost, I'll let you go again. For the sake of the sacred body of the human race." He turned around again, walked up the stairs, and came in front of Qin Xianer. His powerful domain power penetrated the heavenly book's defense bit by bit. The defense was slowly peeling away. It was only a matter of time before it was broken. Ancient god Jiulong. Su Yu clenched his teeth, 9-colored blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. "Do you think I'm an ant that you can bully at will?" He opened his mouth and spat out 3 drops of blood. He spat out 3 drops of blood. It was the blood of the 9-tailed Tianzi. With this blood, Su Yu had activated the state of the sacred body. However, his strongest state of the sacred body did not rely on the blood of the 9-tailed Tianzi. It was his own heart. After spitting out the blood, he became a human again. Ancient god Jiulong didn't even look at it. He silently resolved the heavenly book's words, until a soft thump was heard. It was the sound of a beating heart, but it was extraordinarily powerful. It was like a heavy hammer hitting a war drum. Ancient god Jiulong raised his head and looked. There was a strange look in his eyes. "This heart is..." A pitch-black heart could be seen on Su Yu's chest, and it was beating unceasingly, emitting ripples that were almost tangible. The ripples spread in all directions. Rich primordial qi was produced wherever it passed. "Sacred mountain's son of heaven's heart?" Ancient god Jiulong looked at Su Yu, his eyes filled with confusion. "The body of the mortal saint body, the heart of the stone embryo son of heaven. What exactly are you?" The sacred body of the mortal body and the stone-birth son of heaven were existences that opposed each other. It had been like that since absolute beginning existed. The 2 of them were natural enemies. So, why did both of them fuse together in Su Yu's body? Bang! The 9-colored energy on Su Yu's body was no longer flowing on the surface of his body. Instead, it was like a 1,000-zhang tall flame that suddenly exploded, illuminating the entire underground cave. From afar, Su Yu looked like an emperor of 9-colored flames. A hint of seriousness appeared on ancient god 9-Dragon's face for the first time, but he did not take it to heart. "Although I don't quite understand what's going on, it's still a lesser human saint body. There's nothing to worry about." He flicked his finger. A mighty power that far surpassed that of the 9-dragon souls swept over like a torrential storm. If he had been in his previous state, he would have been reduced to dust in an instant. because this was a slightly more serious attack from Ancient God Nine Dragon. Suyu stepped onto the stairs again. Ancient God Nine Dragon's finger flicked over, but it was burned into nothingness by the turbulent leak flames. Ancient God Nine Dragon straightened his body slightly and said, "Interesting. It seems like your lesser human saint body is slightly more powerful than other people's lesser human saint bodies." His face was expressionless as he grabbed at Suyu with one hand. His 5 fingers turned into 5 ferocious giant dragons that intertwined and crushed toward Suyu. Rumble, the massive destruction caused the underground ruins to collapse on the spot, and the walls of the heavenly court were shattered, revealing the nothingness of the outside world. Only the altar was intact. Ancient God Nine Dragon once again dispelled the words of the heavenly book. After many days of continuous effort, the words of the heavenly book had already begun to show signs of loosening. Now it was just speeding up the disintegration. Once that happened, Ancient God Nine Dragon would initiate the Ancient God Jiryo's reincarnation ritual. At that time, Qin Xiener would no longer exist in this world. There would only be Ancient God Jiryo. Bang! However, right at that moment, a pile of ruins suddenly exploded and shot into the sky. A person stood up from the ruins. It was Suyu, who was buried there. Not only was the 9-colored power in his body not extinguished, but it grew stronger and stronger as his heart beat faster. The faster the Emperor's heart beat, the more the Emperor's blood would fuse into Suyu's body. And the longer Suyu maintained the state of the mortal saint body, the greater the pressure on his heart, and the faster it would beat. Therefore, the more time passed, the stronger Suyu would be, but the more dangerous it would be. Perhaps, before the enemy was destroyed, his heart would be destroyed and he would die first. Break! Suyu punched through the air. All of a sudden, the earth shook and the mountains shook. The interior of the heavenly court couldn't contain this 9-colored power. The threatening 9-colored light penetrated his body and shot in all directions of the nothingness. The dim yellow doomsday was covered by the 9-colored light. The nothingness was also shrouded by the 9-colored light, illuminating countless islands and reefs hidden deep in the nothingness. The great human saint body? It should be great accomplishment? The human saint body has been extinct for a long time. How could there be a great accomplishment existence? On an island, a cold-looking woman in a long black dress sat cross-legged. She held a long black sword in her hand and sat cross-legged on the ground. Black lotus flowers bloomed all over her body. When the 9-colored light shone, she slowly opened her eyes. In her eye sockets, the lotus flowers bloomed. The human saint body. Is it Junior Brother? The woman in the black dress murmured. After a moment of silence, she stood up with the sword in her hand. She turned into a long rainbow and sped away. Outside the realm of an 8-star civilization, Lu Zhu was feeding the light divine deer when the 9-colored light suddenly pierced through. He stood up with a solemn expression and looked into the distance. The human saint body is about to be great accomplishment? Is it Suyu? Lu Zhu was uncertain. He pinched his fingers and calculated, his face grave. It's much earlier than expected. It seems that I have to inform that old guy to come out. He touched the forehead of the light divine deer and took out a scroll. There was an ancient wizard tribe word on it. I can only ask that old man to come out. He bit his finger and blood dyed the scroll red. At the same time, in the cold depths of the nothingness, it was a place where even the light of the holy mountain couldn't reach. An incomparably imposing giant was standing on a broken island. On that island there were several tombstones. Most of the tombstones had been broken, and only one tombstone that was 1,000 feet tall still stood majestically. The tombstone was densely covered with cracks, as if it had been damaged by some forbidden power. One could only vaguely see the words carved on it. Chapter 2778. The human ancestor stood in front of the tombstone, silent for a long time. In the past, the 9 ancestors shouldered the hopes of the world and fought with their backs to the wall, fighting on the sacred mountain. Unfortunately, they let down the countless creatures who sacrificed themselves. The 9 ancestors perished, wiped out. In front of him was a cenotaph built by an unknown person. It was filled with empty graves. However, the 9 ancestors were all buried. Why were there only 8 cenotaphs? Among them were the human ancestor, the dragon ancestor, the Tian Shu ancestor, and so on. Only one ancestor was missing. The human ancestor gently touched the tombstone of the Tian Shu ancestor and let out a silent sigh. In the desolate twilight, the giant's lonely sigh, like a helpless whisper echoing throughout the era. At this moment, the 9-colored light blotted out the sky and the sun, enveloping the pitch-black corner. The human ancestor raised his head. His empty eyes flickered with the ripples of flames. A low sigh came from his throat. "My clan," then, he turned around and took a step forward, leaving the lonely island. At the same time, beneath the heavenly court, Su Yu's 9-colored light, imbued with the quasi-first-rate holy body, bombarded forward. Crack! The formations on the sacrificial altar were all shattered. However, ancient god Jiulong was abnormally calm, his expression indifferent. You have no idea what it means to have a living ancient god. From the beginning until now, Su Yu had obtained many items related to the ancient gods. He had even obtained their sacred artifacts before. However, those could not compare to a living ancient god. Ancient god Jiulong stretched out his palm and lightly blocked the attack. The 9-colored light was completely blocked, unable to break through ancient god 9 Dragon's defense in the slightest. Can't even withstand a single blow. Ancient god Jiulong turned around expressionlessly. He allowed the 9-colored light to bombard him, but it was all blocked by the surface of his body. It could not harm him at all. He lowered his head and continued to bombard the heavenly book characters as if there was no one else around. There was a series of crisp sounds. An obvious crack finally appeared on the heavenly book characters. Ancient god Jiulong used this crack to further expand the heavenly book characters before completely tearing them apart. The heavenly book characters dissipated. The sacrificial altar sensed this and began to move. Rays of light gushed out from beneath the altar and penetrated Qin Xian'er's body. The bloodline in his body started to boil at an alarming rate. Furthermore, there was a faint, unfamiliar aura being emitted from his body. It was an exceptionally cold and gloomy aura. It was as if it had come from the 9 serenities of hell. Su Yu was no stranger to this. That was ancient god 9 Nether. Su Yu was anxious, and the murderous intent in his eyes intensified. The heart of an emperor was beating even more violently. Bang bang, one could even faintly hear the sound of his heart beating wildly. The 9-colored energy was completely unleashed. The power was no longer of 9 colors. There was also a blood-red color in it. An additional color signified a qualitative change. It was a kind of qualitative change in the state of the great accomplishment Saint Physique. Die! Su Yu's body turned into a sharp arrow as he took a step forward. Sensing the change behind him, ancient god 9 Dragon turned around, his pupils constricting slightly. Great completion Saint Physique? What was going on? In the current era, it was impossible for a great perfection Saint Physique to appear. Why is Su Yu's holy body so strange? Why is it getting stronger again and again? So much so that he could attain the great accomplishment Saint Physique? Seeing Su Yu's attack, ancient god 9 Dragon was not afraid at all. He weaved his hands together. 8 dragon souls gushed out from behind him and coiled together to form a cauldron. It vaguely looked like the divine 9 Dragon cauldron. Suppress and destroy evil. The cauldron flew rapidly. It was many times more powerful than the palm he had just struck out. However, Su Yu simply grabbed the spinning cauldron with his palm. Then, he clenched it with force. Crack, the cauldron was easily crushed. Ancient god 9 Dragon was affected. His body trembled and his eyes were grave. Saint Physique Su, are you really going to make an enemy of me, ancient god 9 Dragon, for the body of a woman? Without saying a word, Suyu stepped forward to kill him. Ancient God Nine Dragon's eyes turned cold. Fine. I showed you mercy just now. Since you don't cherish it, don't blame me for erasing your saint physique. So what if he had a great perfection saint physique? He was the dignified ancient God Nine Dragon. What was there to be afraid of? Swish. He slapped the top of his head and pulled out a sword from the top of his head. It was a blood-stained sword. The blood on it was the Emperor's blood. Only the Emperor can kill a saint physique, ancient God Nine Dragon murmured. This sword is stained with the Emperor's blood. It will be easy to kill you. With a wave of his wrist, the blood sword swept across. It drew a path that made one's blood boil. It was as if there were shadows of stone statues within the tracks. Suyu did not dodge. He just grabbed at the air. A long sword of 10 colors appeared in his palm. You are not qualified. Suyu grabbed the sword and moved forward. The long sword was dragged on the ground, leaving a long trail of sparks behind it. Then, the sword slashed forward. The piercingly cold sword energy looked down on everything in its path. The two collided in the air and eliminated each other. But Suyu's killing intent did not stop there. The long sword in his hand pierced through the air. Ancient God Nine Dragon blocked with his sword in front of his chest, his brows slightly furrowed. Ding! The long sword of 10 colors was blocked, unable to advance an inch. Ancient God Nine Dragon looked at Qin Xianer. At this moment, the aura of the ancient god Juyo in her body was getting stronger and stronger. With a hint of relief on his face, he said lightly, "Holy body, don't waste your energy. The return of the ancient god Juyo is the will of heaven." Before he could finish speaking, all of a sudden, he heard a crisp sound. The long sword stained with blood in front of his chest had cracked. He looked at the long sword in Suyu's hand. The black light inside had doubled in thickness, occupying half of the colors, and the surface of Suyu's body began to change strangely. A layer of faintly discernible gray color began to appear on the surface of his body. It was petrification. His body began to turn into stone. Petrification, just like the Son of Heaven. Crack! The long sword in front of ancient God Nine Dragon's chest shattered, and the long sword stabbed into his body. Clang, however, the toughness of ancient God Nine Dragon's body was beyond imagination. Suyu had used his holy body to such an extent, but he still could not do anything to ancient God Nine Dragon. The corners of the latter's mouth curled into a contemptuous smile. Finally feeling despair? I told you, you know nothing about living ancient gods. His body had been soaked in the Tao abyss. It had long since surpassed the scope of harm in this world. In this world, there were only a few people who could harm her. Unfortunately, Suyu was not one of them. Suyu's eyes were cold, and for some reason, he felt a little violent, as if he had gone berserk. Strands of strange, pitch-black color appeared in his long golden hair. Those long black hair seemed to be burning, is that so? His heart raced, about to reach the limit of what he could bear. At this moment, the majority of the long sword of 10 colors had turned black. Puff! The cold tip of the sword broke through ancient God Nine Dragon's ancient god body and stabbed into his body. A deep, intense pain stabbed into ancient God Nine Dragon's soul. Chapter 2779. He had forgotten how long it had been since he had felt pain. Now, the intense pain was coming at him with great force. He looked at the colorful blood of the ancient god flowing out of his chest with a startled expression. When he came to his senses, he was filled with rage. Get lost! Ancient god Jilong bellowed. It was as if a volcano had erupted from the wound, and boundless ancient god power gushed out from it. Indistinctly, the mad roars of countless creatures could be heard. It turned into a destructive shock wave that swept out. In an instant, the sword that had pierced into his body was shaken out. At the same time, the shock wave did not slow down and headed straight for Suyu. Suyu gripped the sword with both hands and swept it forward. All of a sudden, The sword drew a pitch-black arc and split the shock wave in two. The shock wave brushed past Su Yu's body. In an instant, it pierced through the mountain wall and the giant ship of the heavenly court. Two ferocious cracks were clearly visible. Endless nothingness took the opportunity to pour into the cracks and wreak havoc inside the heavenly court. The heavenly court's warship sank slowly. The two had only just exchanged blows, but the heavenly court's warship was already on the verge of being destroyed. Ancient God Jilong was enraged. "I should have strangled you back then." He finally got serious. He wiped his chest with one hand and healed his injury. At the same time, he weaved signs with both hands. The 8 yuan base domains circled around him, forming an 8-colored mirror. "You have successfully angered me." Ancient God Jilong pointed at the air. The mirror faced Su Yu and reflected his figure in it. Su Yu, who was in the mirror, smiled strangely. He raised the black sword in his hand and cut his own head. Real world. Su Yu was slightly shocked. He was no stranger to the real world. Anyone who controlled the real world could become the supreme existence of that world. However, Ancient God Jilong's real world was not perfect enough. It was between the half-real world and the real world. But even so, it still possessed unimaginable power. One of them was creation. By including Su Yu's figure in it, he could manipulate the Su Yu in the mirror to influence the Su Yu in reality. Su Yu's palm began to shake uncontrollably. Following his reflection in the mirror, he raised the sword and placed it on his own neck. Su Yu's eyes were filled with an astonishing willpower as he resisted tenaciously. Only then did he manage to gain control of the sword and slowly put it down. Ancient God Nine Dragon snorted and made a grabbing motion, gathering up the ancient god blood and sprinkling it over the mirror. Instantly, the 8-colored light in the mirror became more intense than ever. The control that Su Yu had taken back with great difficulty was immediately lost. He raised his arm at an astonishing speed and quickly slashed at his own neck. At this critical moment, the small Kylin, which had been silent for a long time, sensed that Su Yu was in danger, so it immediately came out of the spatial storage device. He used his own body to slam into the 8-colored mirror. He tried to knock the mirror off course. This might help Su Yu break free from the mirror's control. But in front of Ancient God Nine Dragon, how difficult would it be for the little Qilin to succeed? With a flick of his finger, the little Kylin was forced to retreat. But the little Qilin was unwilling. With blood at the corners of his mouth, he charged forward once again, vowing to save Su Yu with his life. "Ignorant fool," Ancient God Nine Dragon indifferently said. A beam of light formed by the fusion of the 8 elemental domains shot out from his eyes. It struck the little Kylin's body with a loud bang. A miserable groan was heard. The little Kylin turned into a cloud of mist on the spot. Its breath of life was rapidly disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was dead. The little Kylin that had accompanied Su Yu since the Jiuzhou continent. Dead, just like that. Su Yu's pupils gradually dilated. He could not believe the scene before him. His mind was completely blank. So much so that he did not even realize that there were many more burning black strands of hair in his hair. His body had also undergone a drastic change. Half of it was shining with 9-colored light. The other half was petrified. The other half was the stone flower of the heavenly sun of stone. The long sword in his hand had turned completely pitch black. At this moment, Su Yu seemed to have become a completely different person. Ancient God Nine Dragon frowned slightly. Half mortal body, half stone body of the heavenly sun of stone? Ancient God Nine Dragon had seen many things, but he had never seen such a scene. He had never heard of anyone being able to successfully fuse two great constitutions. Looking at the unprecedented fusion form, Ancient God Nine Dragon did not know why, but he felt a little uneasy. He suddenly felt a little regretful. Was he being too ruthless? However, it was too late for regret. When Su Yu's eyes regained focus, his eyes were also dyed with a strange black color. It was as if he had lost his pupils. At first glance, how could he still be considered human? Ah! Su Yu roared at the sky. The arm that was being controlled suddenly stopped moving. At this moment, the entire mirror suddenly shattered into pieces and completely shattered. Caught off guard, ancient god Nine Dragon was blown back by the explosion. His face was filled with shock. It could shatter his real world? How was this possible? In his shock, Su Yu's burning black hair danced wildly in the wind. His pitch-black eyes shone with a devouring light. The peerless black sword in his hand pierced forward with a force that could shake the heavens. At this moment, ancient god Nine Dragon finally felt the fear of the one-faced heavenly son of stone. That was the fear of death. His mind trembled. He weaved seals one after another, and the dragon soul, Yuan level realm, and various other defenses appeared in front of him. However, within the black thunderbolt of the sword, it shattered completely. The cold sword pierced mercilessly into ancient god Nine Dragon's body like a rainbow. Moreover, it pierced through him from front to back. What? Ancient god Nine Dragon spat out a mouthful of blood. Su Yu seemed to have gone mad. Not only did he not stop, but he also stabbed forward fiercely, causing ancient god Nine Dragon to retreat and be deeply nailed to the stone wall. Die! Su Yu bellowed. The black sword danced wildly, bursting with thousands of sword energies. Ancient god Nine Dragon was about to be killed. At this moment of life and death, ancient god Nine Dragon flew into a rage. That's enough. He put his palms together, and a series of explosions rang out from his body. Looking closely, a bloody mist gushed out from his back. Beneath the mist of blood, a clear seal could be seen. It had been shattered. It turned out that there had always been a seal under ancient god Nine Dragon's skin. That seal was used to suppress one's own strength. Everyone who left the Tao abyss would consciously suppress their cultivation. Because if too much power leaked out, it would attract a nightmarish existence. At this moment, in the face of Su Yu's frenzied attacks, ancient god Nine Dragon had no choice but to remove the seal and reveal his true self. The fusion of the human clan's divine body and the divine mortal body? Humph, what is this? Ancient god Nine Dragon grabbed the blade of the black sword with one hand. Then, he slowly removed it from his body. Su Yu tried to press the black sword down and split it in two. However, ancient god Nine Dragon seemed to have become a completely different person. The ancient god power was twice as strong as before. Chapter 2780. Get lost! Ancient god Jilong swung the black sword with all his might. But at that moment, Su Yu growled, "Future incarnation!" Boom! The world rumbled. The mountain where ancient god Jilong stood was split apart by a powerful black light. All the way to the bottom of the mountain. It revealed Su Yu and ancient god Jilong, who were in a stalemate. Su Yu looked up, his pupils constricting slightly. He saw a black-haired, black-eyed being who was half son of heaven and half saint body. He held a giant sword burning with black flames as he stood majestically in the sky. The future incarnation knew how to use the Son of Heaven's heart better than Su Yu himself. Moreover, he had reached the pinnacle. Whoosh! The future incarnation was brimming with murderous intent as he crazily teleported forward. A black sword pierced through ancient god Jilong's back. What? Ancient god Jilong, who was just about to pull out Su Yu's black sword, suffered unprecedented damage. His hands loosened, and Su Yu's black sword returned. The two black swords crisscrossed, piercing through ancient god Jilong. Then, the two Su Yu waved their swords at the same time. Blood rained down. Ancient god Jilong had been shattered. The blood rained down on the two of them, making them look like they were made of blood. It was finally over. Su Yu's main body took a few deep breaths. His remaining rationality allowed him to slowly calm down. Had ancient god Jilong really been killed? What was with the seal on his back? He looked around and suddenly discovered that the seal was quietly absorbing the flesh and blood on the ground. Humph! Su Yu's black sword slashed down. Even an ancient god could be killed with a single strike. However, the seal merely created a spark before it continued to absorb flesh and blood, as if nothing had happened. Su Yu finally became serious and joined forces with the future incarnation. The two swords slashed down on the seal, causing it to tremble violently. A trace of black blood flowed out of the seal. At the same time, an extremely ancient and terrifying aura appeared. To be able to destroy a drop of my blood, Su Yu, I have underestimated you. That voice belonged to ancient god Jilong, but it was 10,000 times more terrifying than ancient god Jilong. Just hearing that voice made the oil lamp above Su Yu and the future incarnation flicker, as if it was about to be extinguished. The two of them were like lowly fireflies in front of that aura. It could be destroyed at any time. Su Yu's pupils shrank. A drop of blood? Had they been fighting against a single drop of ancient god Jilong's blood? How was that possible? Su Yu had fused the holy mortal body and the stone embryo son of heaven, and his combat power had reached the peak of perfection. No one was able to contend against it even after it passed through the void several times. How could it be? Just a drop of blood? You'd better pray to stay away from the Tao abyss forever. Otherwise, I will make you regret it. With that, the seal began to burn. Even the flesh and blood that he had absorbed dissipated. The remaining flesh and blood that he couldn't absorb in time were instantly burned into a bloody mist by those flames. To prevent future troubles, Su Yu tried to destroy the blood fog. Who knew that before he could make a move? The blood mist suddenly merged into Qin Xian'er's body. Qin Xian'er was releasing the aura of an ancient god of the Nine Nether. He abruptly opened his eyes. In his eyes there was a dim yellow light of the Nine Nether. An incomparably tyrannical power erupted from his body. The strength of this energy was far inferior to ancient god Nine Dragons. But it was still extremely terrifying. You're finally awake. Qin Xian'er's body stood up straight. She looked at her own body, a little dissatisfied. Why is it a little girl? I've even given birth to a child. The voice was still Qin Xian'er's. But the person was no longer her. Su Yu looked over, his heart sinking. Who are you? Su Yu clung to the last shred of hope in his heart. Qin Xian'er turned around and looked at Su Yu and his future incarnation. The corners of her mouth curled into a cold smile. You are the husband of this body, aren't you? Su Yu's heart sank. Qin Xian'er was no longer here. Her body had been completely taken over. Su Yu gripped the black sword tightly, his heart filled with despair. He had lost the little Kylan and the only wife he wanted to protect. What did he have left? Nothing at all? How pitiful! Before that little girl's soul was obliterated, she was begging me not to hurt you. The ancient god of the Nine Nether had a faint smile on his face. A pair of sharp eyes penetrated Su Yu's emotional fluctuations. Black liquid dripped from Su Yu's eyes. They were tears. He could imagine the scene before Qin Xian'er's soul was obliterated. That silly girl, she must be thinking about him. Even in death, she was thinking about him. She was begging the enemy to spare his life. As he thought of this, even his heart ached. It was as if his heart was bleeding. Drop after drop. It dyed his dead heart red. Qin Xian'er was gone. His heart was dead. He had no more worries in the world. No more fetters. He was completely free. At this moment, his long golden hair rapidly turned black. All of it turned into black flames. Moreover, the black flames spread rapidly from his hair to his whole body. The incomparable darkness covered the nine-colored radiance and the petrified color of the sun of heaven. Su Yu was only left with a pitch-black figure. Even his eyes were as black as ink. Finally, I can be free, Su Yu murmured. However, it was not a suicidal act of seeking relief. It was a release from the pain that had been suppressed in the depths of his heart. There was no longer a lover left in the world. Why did he need to restrain himself? Seeing this, the future incarnation's expression changed drastically. He shouted in a deep voice, "Wake up quickly! You are going to be possessed by a demon. Suyu laughed in a low voice. What is a demon, and what is righteousness? If killing my wife is righteousness, then what is the use of this so-called righteousness? Main body, please calm down. Once you are possessed by a demon, there is no turning back. Perhaps you will become the public enemy of the world. Suyu laughed heartily. His laughter was filled with boundless madness. So what if I am the public enemy of the world? So what if the demon is coming? I only want the ancient gods to be destroyed, Suyu said through gritted teeth. He raised his head abruptly. His eyes shot out crimson-black thunder. The aftermath of the thunder touched the future incarnation, causing him, who had fused the saint body and the son of heaven body, to collapse instantly. The black thunder was unstoppable, heading straight for the ancient god Jiryo. The latter's mocking expression had long since stiffened, replaced by a touch of fear. Destructive primordial thunder. You are that person. She seemed to recognize something. Her scalp tingling, she screamed and turned to flee. The dignified ancient god Jiryo, even though he had just recovered, had less than 1,000th of his strength. However, it was still the sum of the 9 drops of ancient god Jiryo's blood. However, seeing Suyu's current state, he fled in terror. However, he did not manage to take 2 steps. The destructive primordial thunder penetrated his body. His body was unharmed. The soul inside let out a shrill scream. Swoosh! An extremely powerful soul of a black-clothed woman frantically escaped from Qin Xian'er's body. The soul was so powerful that it had reached the middle stage of the heavenly law master. However, she barely managed to escape. Chapter 2781. Isn't it too late to leave now? The black shadow was naturally Suyu. His whole body was pitch black, without a trace of light. He was like a black hole in the starry sky, devouring everything around him. The woman in black was the soul of the ancient god Jiryo. She stared at the black shadow in front of her, horrified. It's not me, it's none of my business. Everything was planned by the ancient god Jiryo, it has nothing to do with me. She tried to explain herself hysterically, as if she was longing for the last ray of hope. Suyu's voice was indifferent, as if he had lost his soul, extremely hollow. The ancient god Jiryo deserves to die, and so do you. As he spoke, Suyu slowly opened his mouth, revealing a row of pitch-black, demon-like teeth. Let me go, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. The ancient god Jiryo pleaded frantically, extremely terrified. However, what responded to her was Suyu's extremely cold, black eyes. He opened his mouth and devoured the ancient god Jiryo's soul. Countless screams reverberated in Suyu's stomach, extremely mournful and shrill. One could see with the naked eye that Suyu's stomach was expanding and contracting. Palm prints could even be seen. That was the ancient god Jiryo trying to expand her stomach inside. Suyu lowered his head and looked at his stomach. He pressed his palm gently on it, and his stomach immediately calmed down. At the same time, the screams inside stopped abruptly. The ancient god Jiryo had been completely devoured by the demonized Suyu. He just needed to digest it. So, Suyu finally turned around and looked at Qin Xian'er. The cold corpse was reflected in his eyes, finally causing a trace of emotion to appear in his hollow eyes. He walked up to Qin Xian'er. He stretched out his fingers and gently stroked Qin Xian'er's face. A heart-wrenching pain spread from the bottom of his heart. The beautiful past, the bits and pieces of the past, the passing of yesterday. They all turned into merciless sharp blades, stirring at the bottom of his heart. His heart was being torn apart. Suyu clutched his chest and knelt down weakly in front of Qin Xian'er's corpse. I'm sorry I didn't protect you, didn't protect our future, didn't protect your simplest wish. Suyu murmured. It was as if he was saying his final farewell. I'm very happy to meet you in my life, and I'm very happy to be your husband. Thank you, Xian'er. Suyu lowered his head and kissed Qin Xian'er's forehead deeply. Then, he picked up the corpse and slowly left the ground. In the past, I only wanted a small courtyard. I only wanted to live the simplest, most ordinary life with you. But why can't even this small wish be fulfilled? My requirements have always been very, very low." He let out a suppressed sigh. The ground behind him collapsed completely. The altar also shattered with a loud bang. Wherever Suyu passed, he left behind a series of pitch-black footprints on the ground. Every footprint exuded a thick black air current, making one's hair stand on end. When he left the former ancient god Nine-Dragon Mountain, all that was left behind was a stretch of scorched earth. He hugged Qin Xianer and looked at the Tao abyss in the distance. The ancient gods must die. His heart was like dead ashes, and he only had a single thought in his mind: slaying an ancient god. Apart from that, nothing else mattered. There was no longer anything to worry about in this world. He took a step forward, leaving behind only a wave of ripples as he disappeared without a trace. Not long after, a woman in a black dress appeared, standing at the edge of the ruins of the mountain. She held a pitch-black sword in her hand and stared at the series of black footprints on the ground, her face slightly gloomy. "Am I already too late?" Looking in the direction where Suyu had left, the woman in the black dress was silent for a long time, then broke through the air and chased after him. In the dark nothingness, Suyu carried Qin Xianer's corpse and crossed over. His speed was already incredibly fast. Even the blood of the ancient god Nine-Dragon would take a month to arrive. However, it only took Suyu one day to see the long and dark abyss. From a distance, it looked like a crack. However, when he got closer, he discovered it. It was a huge sunken basin. It was boundless, much larger than even the 8-star civilizations. However, from a flat surface, only a crack could be seen. Looking down from above, the sky above the Tao abyss was filled with a thick layer of dark clouds. There were only a few places where the dark clouds were thin, and the situation below could be faintly seen. Suyu tried to pass directly through the dark clouds. However, as soon as he approached, a wisp of dark clouds floated over, causing the black light on the surface of Suyu's body to flicker. If Suyu had been in the state of the holy body, he would have been dead. Even with the mysterious constitution, he could not survive in the mysterious dark clouds for too long. If he was not careful, he could be buried in it. Suyu looked at the other two places where the dark clouds were thin. Those should be the few entrances that could be entered. His figure flashed, and he entered through one of the gaps with Qin Xianer in his arms. As soon as he stepped in, a stern voice sounded: "Those who trespass into the Tao abyss will be killed without mercy." A golden thunderbolt rolled over and headed straight for Suyu. Bang! The violent thunderbolts caused the heaven and earth to rumble unceasingly. They also struck Suyu's body. However, Suyu did not have any reaction. The black mist on the surface of his body did not even fluctuate. The golden thunderbolt quickly retreated, revealing an old man in a golden robe. His cultivation had reached the early stage of the heavenly lawmaster. "Which race are you from?" the old man asked in surprise. He had never seen such a strange race in front of him. Suyu took a blow from him and did not suffer any damage? Apart from a few special races, there were absolutely no other races that could achieve this. However, Suyu did not answer. Instead, he asked, "Who are you? Are you related to the ancient gods?" His voice was filled with indifference. Upon hearing that, the old man in the golden robe could not help but laugh. "So, you are a spirit from outside the Tao abyss who knows nothing. You don't even know what the Tao abyss is." In the past, he might have been very curious about what the Tao abyss was, but now he only had murderous intent. "Answer me," Suyu said indifferently. The old man in the golden robe snorted. "I am the law enforcement officer of the ancient god tribe. Do you think I have anything to do with the ancient gods?" Suyu nodded slightly. "If you do, that's all right." The old man in the golden robe was completely unaware of the imminent disaster. He scolded, "The Tao abyss is not for trespassing. Since you have trespassed, you must be punished. He looked at Qin Xianer in Su Yu's arms and said, Throw away the body, and you will be punished by kneeling on the ground. However, Su Yu did not move an inch. The old man in the golden robe narrowed his eyes. Are you deaf? Who told you to throw away the body? The Tao Abyss is not a place for any random corpse to be buried. As his voice fell, the old man in the golden robe casually struck Qin Xianer in Su Yu's arms with the power of the heavenly lawmaster. However, Su Yu finally moved. A black thunderbolt shot out from his eyes. Before the old man could react, he was killed on the spot. The powerful thunderbolt dispersed part of the dark clouds. Under the dark clouds, thousands of heavenly lawmasters were revealed. They stood perfectly straight and faced Su Yu, ready to strike. Chapter 2782. Those who trespass into the Tao Abyss are unforgivable. Thousands of heaven law masters released their will. His will was so strong that it even shook the terrifying dark clouds to the point of trembling without end. Su Yu looked indifferent. He looked at them as if he were looking at a group of ants. What Tao Abyss? What ancient god tribe? Let's bury them all. Su Yu swooped down. The black light on the surface of his body rippled and turned into a pitch-black pattern. It swept around. Wherever the pattern swept past, it turned into smoke and dust. Those strong men were not spared. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the thousands of heaven lawmasters were killed. At this moment, they finally panicked and retreated. Quick! Inform the ancient god tribe that a strong enemy is coming. He did not have the chance to finish his words. A bolt of nirvana thunder flashed in all directions. In just a few breaths, all the remaining strong men were killed. Not a single one was left. On the land of the Tao Abyss, countless creatures looked up at the sky. The sky of the Tao Abyss was gray. It was covered by dark clouds all year round, and no strong sunlight could be seen. However, there was no wind, frost, rain, or snow. But at this moment, their eyes widened as they saw black rain falling from the sky. It was the rain of many strong men being annihilated. Then, sirens sounded all over the land for a long time. A strong enemy has invaded. Many creatures returned to the tribe. Bell tolls and hurried shouts rang out, ordering the creatures outside to retreat back into the tribe. They stared at the sky in fear. When the black rain fell, the sky gradually darkened. Visible to the naked eye, an incomparably huge pitch-black sun slowly descended. The sun carried with it a strong sense of slaughter and destruction. Once it came, it must be the power to destroy the world. Are you a human or a demon? A desolate cry came from the vast land of the Tao Abyss. The ancient mountains trembled violently. From the ground, an old man surrounded by a mysterious aura walked out. Su Yu was no stranger to that aura. It was the aura of the wizard tribe. Luo Xue was in the belly of the Tao Tai, the saint lady of the wizard tribe. Su Yu also guessed the identity of the old man in front of him. It should be the wizard ancestor who helped the ancient god Jiulong leave a message to the descendant. He was also the one who sealed the epic-making dragon in Taotia's stomach. So what if you're a human? So what if you're a demon? Su Yu calmly walked down. The black light around his body shone brightly, slowly melting the ancient land. Only the Grand Wizard was unaffected. He gazed at Su Yu quietly and sighed. Humans can live, but demons must be destroyed. Su Yu murmured, If I have to be bullied as a human, I would rather be a demon. He took a step forward, and the black light around him turned into ripples that pushed outwards. The Grand Wizard grunted. He involuntarily took a step back, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. An ordinary lord of the heaven law would have died long ago. He was only bleeding. His cultivation was far above that of the revived ancient god Nine Nether. Get out of my way while I still have a heart, Su Yu said calmly. He was looking for ancient god Nine Dragon, and everything belonging to ancient god Nine Dragon. At the bottom of his heart, there was still a shred of rationality. He restrained himself from killing recklessly. The Grand Wizard still stood in the same place and laughed hoarsely. I am old after all. After crossing 2 eras, my body and soul have decayed. How could he be defeated by Suyu when he was at his peak? However, he had lived from the previous era to the present. He was already rotten. He murmured, I am not here to stop you, but to save you. Rip. He tore open his ancient clothes, revealing his chest. There was an unusually striking wound there. It was like a scar of 9 dragons, shocking to the eye. At my peak, I fought with ancient god 9 Dragon, who came to the Tao Abyss, and I was defeated in 1 move. The Grand Wizard said, No, not defeated, but he spared my life and made me a slave to guard this ancient land forever. Suyu stopped and stared at him. Where is ancient god 9 Dragon? He no longer cared about the truth of the past. He didn't care about his own life or death. He only cared about whether he could kill him or not. Ancient god 9 Dragon is in the Tao Abyss, but if you go there, he can destroy you with 1 look, the Grand Wizard said bitterly. Ancient god 9 Dragon is far more powerful than you can imagine. At this time, Suyu went over. He would only be courting death, and his death would be meaningless. So what? Suyu said quietly. Immortal ancient god, my heart will always hurt. He tiptoed and bypassed the Grand Wizard. The Grand Wizard turned his back to him and sighed deeply. Human sacred body, I sympathize with your experience, but please save your strength first. Suyu didn't listen and continued forward. At this moment, a majestic voice resounded in the sky above the Tao Abyss. The Grand Wizard made you a slave. Why did you betray him? As the voice fell, the Grand Wizard's face turned pale, and there was a hint of pain in his expression. Looking at his chest, the dragon-shaped scar was wriggling like a blood-sucking worm, tormenting the Grand Wizard. The dangerous dark clouds in the sky suddenly wriggled violently. Soon, it condensed into an indifferent face. That face belonged to ancient god 9 Dragon. His eyes were empty and expressionless. His eyes were empty and expressionless. It was as if he had seen through time and the creator of all things. If you were outside the Tao Abyss, it might be difficult for me to find you. But since you are here, stay, the ancient god 9 Dragon said indifferently. Golden raindrops fell from the human face formed by the clouds and mist. They fell elsewhere and had no effect. But when they fell on Suyu, they melted the black light on his body. Suyu raised his head, and a bolt of pitch-black thunder burst out of his eyes. With a sizzling sound, the golden raindrops were destroyed. At the same time, he shot up into the sky and into the clouds. The indifferent face turned into a towering giant palm and pressed down. The thunderbolt of silence was destroyed on the spot. It pressed down on Suyu fiercely. Suyu's eyes were full of defiance. Instead of retreating, he soared into the sky and turned into a pitch-black sun to collide head-on with the giant palm. Bang! The giant palm shattered. The black light around Suyu dimmed a lot. In his palm was a drop of struggling blood. The face just now was formed by a drop of blood from ancient god 9 Dragon. Perhaps because it was fresh, the power it displayed was several times greater than the drop of blood from the heavenly court. You have really angered me. As if it came from the depths of the Tao Abyss, a majestic and heavy voice exploded. For a moment, all the spirits of the world submitted. All the strong men of the world prostrated themselves. It was as if their king had arrived. His anger caused them to tremble in fear and unease. Suyu looked down at the ground and stomped hard with his feet. The ancient earth made a cracking sound. A corner of an incomparably deep abyss came into view. He stared into the pitch-black abyss. It was as if a pair of eyes were staring back at him from the abyss. Crash! Suddenly, there was a violent splash. A giant claw covered in dragon scales, like a thunderclap, stretched out from the abyss. It grabbed at Suyu. Chapter 2783. The black light around Suyu shone brightly. It transformed into a desolate ancient sword that was as black as ink and pierced forward. Crack! With a muffled sound, the ancient sword shattered into countless rays of black light. The giant dragon Scale-Claw was enscathed and grabbed Suyu in its palm. From afar, it was as if a giant palm had reached out from the ground and caught the black sun in the sky. The creatures of the Tao Abyss would never forget that scene. Suyu's eyes flashed with a cold light as he tried to break free from the giant dragon Scale-Claw. However, the claw was unusually hard. The black light on the surface of his body could not be broken. However, Suyu did not retreat. Instead, he became even more frenzied. His long black flame hair not only flared up but also grew longer. In a few breaths, it was nearly 10 feet long, even taller than Suyu himself. His face was gradually covered by the long black hair. Only a pair of cold, merciless eyes remained. "Open!" he spat out. The tightly clenched palm was shaken open, and large pieces of dragon scales fell off with fresh blood. A soft groan came from the dark abyss. An ant is still an ant, no matter how much it transforms. Green air suddenly erupted from the giant dragon's Scale-Claw. The airflow instantly suppressed the black light and continued to compress it. The giant dragon's Scale-Claw slowly pressed down. It was trying to crush Suyu into pieces on the spot. Suyu's madness did not diminish. His long black hair grew rapidly, and the flames were abnormally strong. They began to spread towards the giant dragon Scale-Claw. However, the power of the giant dragon Scale-Claw had already surpassed a certain limit. No matter how much Suyu resisted, the last of his life space was slowly being compressed. And this was only the tip of the iceberg of the ancient god Jilong's true strength. At that moment, the dark clouds in the sky suddenly shook violently. It was as if some extremely terrifying existence was forcibly passing through. The corrosive nature of the dark clouds was a taboo existence that even the demonized Suyu did not dare to touch. However, it was being forcibly stirred at this moment. He looked up. It was a gigantic, towering figure. He stepped on the dark clouds as if they were flat ground. The corrosive dark clouds around him did not cause him any harm. Instead, they were automatically dispersed by his astonishing aura. The human ancestor? 3 mighty voices reverberated in the sky at the same time. The first was Suyu. The second was the wizard ancestor. The last one came from the abyss. The towering figure of the human race was projected onto the vast land of the Tao Abyss, causing the sky to fall into darkness. The living beings that were enveloped by it all shivered. It was as if their great emperor had returned. Dong the Renzu stepped down. Heaven and earth shook and all living beings wept. The ground, which had been torn apart by Suyu, was now completely torn into a gigantic fissure. It revealed an even wider abyss. Under the dim yellow light of the sacred mountain, vaguely, a huge creature could be seen emerging from the abyss. It was an incomparably terrifying existence that resembled a dragon but wasn't. His body was covered with ancient scales. There were also countless traces of time. It was so huge that it was not inferior to the Heavenly Court's battleship. What was even more shocking was, there were hundreds of dragon claws on its body. The one that had caught Suyu was only one of them. The human ancestor had descended. Everything crawled on the ground. Even the colossal creatures in the abyss slowly sank into the water. Only a pair of ancient eyes could be seen. Unconcealable fear could be seen in his eyes. The human ancestor's eyes were hollow as he strode over with huge steps. He reached out a hand and grabbed the giant claw that had emerged from the abyss. Indifferent and dignified, he asked, "Who gave you the courage?" His hand fiercely tugged. A miserable groan could be heard from the abyss. The dragon-scaled giant claw was forcefully torn off. "Human ancestor, since you are dead, why are you not destroyed?" The colossal creature in the abyss let out an unwilling roar. In the previous era, he was an existence that could contend against the Emperor. He had clearly died, but he had lived through an entire era. Not only was his body not destroyed, but he still retained a strand of will. Relying on that strand of will, he activated the immortal body of an era and suppressed the current era. Even ancient god Jiulong, who had experienced the accumulation of an era and absorbed the remnants of the Tao abyss, cultivated to become the strongest existence of the current era. But he was still afraid of the human ancestor's body. Without saying a word, the human ancestor punched the abyss through the air. All of a sudden, giant waves rose in the abyss. One of the behemoths let out a painful scream. A stream of blood could be faintly seen gushing out, falling on the vast land of the Tao abyss. Wherever the blood passed, it immediately transformed into mountains and rivers filled with spirit energy, becoming a peerless paradise. The abyss returned to silence. The colossal creature that had emerged from the water had completely sunk. Su Yu, freed, rushed down. The human ancestor gently blocked Su Yu with his palm and shook his head. The abyss, there is no return. Even someone as strong as the human ancestor would not step into the abyss of the Tao abyss. It was as if there was a place there that even he feared. Su Yu looked back, the rationality in his eyes mostly gone. There was only a sliver of hope left. At this moment, he had been possessed to the extreme. There was no turning back. As long as the ancient god does not die, the demonic heart will not be destroyed. If he did not kill ancient god Jiulong, he would not be able to turn back. Su Yu looked deeply at the human ancestor and said, Su Yu will never be able to repay the kindness of the human ancestor. If there is a next life, I will definitely repay it. After saying this, he leaped into the Tao abyss. He refused to turn back. But, at this moment, a voice that made Su Yu's soul tremble hurriedly rang out. Brother Su Yu, you don't even want me anymore? Su Yu looked back abruptly. It was a beautiful woman dressed in a green robe, slender and elegant like a lotus. She had a sad look on her face. She was like a fairy from a painting, beautiful beyond compare. It was as if she was not a woman of this world. Xia Jing Yu, Su Yu said hoarsely. He paused for a long time before slowly saying the name that had become somewhat unfamiliar to him. Xia Jingyu. Xia Jingyu under the pear tree. He had actually forgotten. He had actually forgotten because of Xiener's hatred. At this moment she was still in the goddess clan, and it was unknown whether she was alive or dead. He had actually told him that he had no more worries in this world? Holding Qin Xiener's body in his arms, he looked at Xia Jingyu again. Su Yu struggled in his heart. It was as if there were two voices in his heart, both speaking to him. One of them said to avenge Xiener at all costs. The other said that he still needed to protect Xia Jingyu. Revenge would be avenged in the future. He struggled in his heart. Just as he was unable to free himself, a fragrant softness entered his arms. Xia Jingyu threw herself into his arms and kissed him gently. In an instant, Su Yu's heart was stirred. Those memories that he had deliberately forgotten were like spring water in a dry river, gushing forth once again. The little bits and pieces of the past, the silent touching moments, the unforgettable moments. They drowned Su Yu's memories deeply. Their lips parted. The darkness in Su Yu's black pupils gradually faded. His long, burning hair, as black as ink, had turned into rotten powder. All that was left was a half-petrified, half-nine-colored Su Yu. Looking at Qin Xiener in his arms, Su Yu kissed her forehead deeply and said, Xiener, I'm sorry. I was wrong. If only she was still conscious. Chapter 2784. She would only feel sad. This was because, even at the moment of her death, she had been begging him not to harm Su Yu. I will definitely take revenge, but I won't sacrifice myself, Su Yu said calmly. He pressed on his heart. His wildly beating heart could finally rest and slowly calm down. The petrification and nine-colored glow also retracted. Finally, he returned to his human body. He raised his head, looked at Xia Jingyu, and said apologetically, I've made you suffer, evil girl. Xia Jingyu's calm face suddenly burned, and the fire spread all over her body. When the flames dissipated, what remained was a woman wearing a black lotus dress and holding a sinful sword. Furthermore, she had an ice-cold expression on her face. She and Xia Jingyu had the same appearance and the same soul. It was just that their temperaments were completely different. She was a sinful woman. The sinful girl was expressionless as she said, "Consider it a return to you, no need to thank me." She was still as cold as ever. Holding her sword, she turned around and walked away. Suyu extended his hand and tried to persuade him to stay. "Although the world is vast, do you have a place to stay? There's nothing left, right?" The sinful lady palace had long been buried in the ruins of time. The relationship between her master Yun Yazi and her was also extremely complicated. The sinful girl stopped in her tracks and said without turning her head, "Are you pitying me?" As proud as she was not willing to accept any sympathy. "No, I need you." Suyu strode forward and patted her shoulder. "Senior sister, stay by my side." The sinful woman's body trembled slightly. His emotions were fluctuating uncontrollably. Perhaps, as a loner, no one had ever needed her, right? But what the evil girl didn't know was, it was the same for Suyu. In his previous life, he was also a loner, relying on himself for everything. But now, after such a huge setback in his life, after going through the path of becoming a demon, he was no longer a demon. His temperament gradually changed. The world was too vast. There was only one person, walking alone, and it was difficult to continue. He needed like-minded people to open up a brand new path together. "I've killed countless people and am vicious and merciless. Aren't you scared of me?" The evil girl didn't turn around. Suyu mocked himself. "I've killed countless people, and I'm cruel and merciless. Are you talking about me?" How many people had he killed in his life? He had even turned into a demon before this. In terms of infamy, she might not be inferior to the sinful girl. The sinful girl tightened her grip on the sinful sword. "What do you need from me?" After a pause, she added, "If you think of me as Xia Jingyu, you can forget about it. I'm not her." "I need your power," Suyu said. "Use your power and mine to deal with our common enemy." The enemy of the sinful girl was Prince Xiaoyao. Suyu's enemies were all the emperors and the ancient god Jiulong. Finally, the sinful girl turned around. His indifferent eyes looked at Suyu for the first time as he said, "Fine, I agree." Suyu smiled. Then, he looked at Renzu. "Renzu, I have many doubts and many questions that I would like to ask." The Renzu looked at Suyu, then slowly closed his eyes. It seemed to be in deep sleep as it stood at the edge of the abyss. It was as if he was guarding an abyss. "Sacred body Su, you don't have to ask any more," the ancestral wizard said in a hoarse voice. "The human ancestor is just a broken body. He might not know much." He lifted his eyes and looked at Suyu. "If you want to know something, I might be able to answer it." Suyu's gaze was deep and profound. "I want to know why there is such a huge difference in the strength of both ancient gods." Ancient God 9 Nether strength was not even 1% of ancient God 9 dragons. And those masters, their strength should not be too far off from the ancient gods. But why was it not even 1% of ancient God 9 dragons' strength? In the beginning, ancient God 9 dragons' strength was almost the same as the other ancient gods and even the masters, the ancestral wizard said. "It's just that things are different now." Suyu's eyes flashed. "Why?" The ancestral wizard pointed to the abyss. "The reason is in that abyss. Back then, the 8 masters and the 8 great ancient gods fought for control of the current era," the ancestral wizard said like a witness. "In the end, the emperors joined the side of the masters. Therefore, the 8 great ancient gods were completely defeated. Some died, some were injured, and some fled. Ancient God 9 Dragon discovered the Tao Abyss by accident and entered it despite the advice of others." Suyu looked at the abyss. Even the Renzu said that the abyss should not be entered. The abyss is the most taboo place in the great beginning realm. Some people say that the emperor of the holy mountain came from the abyss. He cultivated there for an era. Not only did he lose his human form and become a giant abyss monster, but his strength also soared, the ancestral wizard said. In the great beginning realm today, probably only the emperors of the holy mountain can compete with ancient god Nine Dragon. Su Yu's heart trembled. The emperor of the holy mountain came from the abyss? The holy mountain was a place that had existed in the great beginning realm since ancient times. It evolved into the entire great beginning realm. Later, it was occupied by a few creatures from chaos, and they began to rule for countless eras. How could Su Yu not be shocked when he heard that the emperor came from the abyss? At this moment, Su Yu finally understood why the 8 masters always hid in the 8-star civilization and did not dare to step out. It turned out that they were afraid of the mutated ancient god Nine Dragon. If that's the case, why doesn't ancient god Nine Dragon leave the abyss and crush everything? Su Yu asked. The current ancient god Nine Dragon was already comparable to the stone fetus emperor. Why did he still stay in the abyss? The ancestral wizard said, "Didn't the Ren Zhu say just now? There is no return from the abyss. Ancient god Nine Dragon is no exception." Su Yu was alerted. Ancient god Nine Dragon could not leave the Tao abyss at all. Otherwise, why would he watch Su Yu overthrow the Heaven Court? All these years, he has been trying to find a way to leave the abyss. The most important thing is his successor. If his successor succeeds in gathering the 9 great domains, he can be released from the abyss. The 9th domain. It really existed. He didn't know if Yun Yazi had found it. Su Yu looked at the boundless land of the Tao Abyss and said, "The Tao Abyss, can it avoid the destruction of the Holy Mountain?" It seemed that all the forces were trying to hide in the Tao Abyss, to avoid the destruction of an era. No! The ancestral wizard shook his head. How terrible is the destruction of an era! How can the land of great beginning survive? However, if we can cross the Tao Abyss and cross to the 9-star civilization, we may be able to avoid the disaster. 9-star civilization? Su Yu was deep in thought. The existence of 9-star civilizations had always been a legend. Even the 8 masters had only ruled 8-star civilizations in their lifetime. What kind of place is that? The ancestral wizard's eyes were full of yearning. A place ruled by the creatures of chaos. Only there is no destruction of an era. The core of the chaotic residents lived on the holy mountain. Most of the chaotic people lived in the 9-star civilization. They occupied the best resources of the entire great beginning realm and avoided disaster every era. They were immortal and enjoyed great fortune. It won't be easy to get there, right? Su Yu asked.